Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the stream today. As you know, we do an open panel. Today's special guest is going to be Nathaniel, a friend of mine. He's a Catholic friend of mine, and I've been really interested in talking to him because, as everybody who watches my channel knows, while I'm an agnostic, I find religion to be fascinating for many reasons, and so I've had a lot of atheists and skeptics on my channel, and I've been trying to basically open up the platform so that everybody can have an opportunity to kind of share different opinions, because the purpose of this channel is to bring people together who have different ideas, because I really want to celebrate diversity. I find that diversity is a really important part of life, and it helps us to progress when we have people pushing back on our ideas. So many of us are afraid to have our ideas challenged, but I think it's pretty obvious if you watch my content that I put myself out there and my ideas out there, and I expect pushback. One of the probably more most popular or common example is I believe in objective morality, and I get a lot of pushback, especially from skeptics, about objective versus subjective morality. And I take it all in good graces, right? I tell people I appreciate the pushback. It causes me to think more carefully and more critically about my position and be able to articulate my ideas more effectively. So this is what I'm trying to encourage everybody to do. I don't think that we need to be expecting affirmation, right, or agreement in everything that we do in life. It's not realistic and it's not healthy. So the point of all this is to bring people together, to teach them how to have respectful conversations, especially when we disagree with each other. So today I'm going to be speaking to Nathaniel. I've met him. Oh, it's been a few months now. I don't even remember how I came across his channel, but we've had some interesting conversations. Nathaniel and I, like many of my theist friends, we probably disagree on a lot more than we agree on, but we have a common respect for each other, right? We treat each other with courtesy, and we're willing to listen to each other, and we're willing to engage in these conversations back and forth. We've even been talking about maybe having a debate about the flood myth. One of these, something that I feel very strongly about, that the global flood is an absolute myth. It's an allegory or whatever you want to call it, but it did not happen. Nathaniel's on the other side of that argument. So in the future, we may set something up like that. So stay tuned for that. Just real quick before I turn it over to Nathaniel, it's a quick update. I've been at this for just over 2 months, and I just want to say thank you so much to the community that we're building here. Over 160 subs already, which absolutely blows my mind. 15,000 or around 15,000 views on the videos, which again, that number is staggering to me. So I'm so grateful for the response that we've been getting. And I want to really make sure you guys understand that this isn't really my channel. I'm responsible for running it and making sure that everybody's respectful, but it's our channel. This is a community. The goal is to spread kindness and respect, to try to understand that we all want to live a good life. In order to live a good life, we must have self-respect. If we don't have self-respect, we're lacking something that we really want, that every human being desires. We cannot have self-respect if we don't respect other people, right? And so it goes back and forth this way. And once you attain this basic understanding, living a good life is very easy. I know it seems so difficult because we get caught up in the rat race, politics, religion, culture, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and we all share this common desire to live this good life. And so if we start at this very fundamental level of seeking and striving for self-respect, which again, you cannot have without respecting others, to me, it seems like a pretty organic process. Everything builds up from there. I've been very successful in my personal relationships, in my marriage, and in business using this model, because everything builds up from that. So I'm going to turn it over to Nathaniel, let him introduce himself. I think, sorry, brother, I had you muted there. Did I unmute you? There it is. Okay, you're live. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, my name's Nathaniel. My channel on YouTube is Taurus Necros Productions. I have a lot of different brands and things I'm doing, but I'll try to keep what's relevant here, which is basically I'm running a media company in order to make money. You know, I'm a writer originally, and I've become a Roman Catholic apologist by accident. I'm not particularly good at it, but it's entertaining. And generally, that's what I find is that people just want to be entertained, and that's fine. I actually think that we were talking about politics. I agree with you on all these things. I agree with you on all these things. It's like the most interesting thing to me, the reason why we're friends is because we agree on virtue, and we come at it from two different backgrounds, and so that's what's fascinating to me because I am on YouTube basically to be virtuous publicly in order to represent my religion, and that's more important than even being intellectually solid or to have a perfect will of always doing good things. I've got all this weakness and whatnot. So yes, and that's ultimately what I've realized is that basically my belief is everything you said, but I think it's very. I'm a novelist first. I've been a novelist since I was 8 years old. I've been writing books for a long time. I've got at least a dozen books published. I keep pulling them out of print because they're not good enough, but and I have to republish them. But um, I I have found in the areas of philosophy and theology and debate and politics and religion that we live in a very unique time. Uh, it's like Satan's Babel, where we live in a time of mass psychosis where all of the truth, this has been the most surprising thing about interacting with people, all of the different truth of the world, the logos, has been scattered, and you find it in different groups. And one of the biggest disappointments about being Catholic is finding out how many people who are baptized in the Catholic Church have no idea what they're doing and what they believe, and there's no consistency to it. And then one of the most interesting things since I got back into public life, because I left it after conversion, was finding out how many truths you can find amongst atheists. I think, and every other group, I think that everyone's kind of looking for who the enemy is, and the truth is that the enemy is very hard to reach. I personally, I think there's one particular sin that has enslaved everybody more than anything else, and it's been going on for a long time. There's a good chance people responsible are dead, and that sin's called usury. And atheists have been the most. They don't use that word usury, but they have been the most accurate as far as an economic understanding, and that's because economics is so godless. So, I didn't pray, by the way. I knocked it out while I was muted. I just prayed in Our Father.
No worries, brother. No, I really. So just to touch on something you said there, my own personal belief, and I think this has probably been said more eloquently by some historian or philosopher or somebody in history, but the true enemy is the enemy within, and I think that's the greatest enemy that we all struggle with. And
Sure.
I don't take this from a theological view, obviously, but really it's more of a psychological view that learning to understand, recognize, and control the ego is one of the greatest hurdles that I think every human being struggles with, because it's difficult to find this healthy balance of helping others at your own detriment, but not being such a detriment to yourself. If you don't prioritize yourself to a certain degree, you're not even in a position to really be able to help other people, right?
Yeah.
You've got to figure out this balance between altruism, which I think is unhealthy and unreasonable position, and then complete egotistical nature, right? Selfishness, where you're only thinking about yourself. I think there's this balance in there. And when people ask me about, because I talk about objective morality, and they say, well, without a religion, how do you figure out what's moral, what's right, what you're supposed to do? And I tell people that I base it on the virtue.
People have a religion and they have no idea what's right or wrong.
There's the word religion. So, yeah, it depends, because I know the word religion.
Sometimes it's helpful to have to work for it, and people, they're told what it is and they believe it and they're wrong. You know what I mean? And then they go out into the world and they say wrong things. Like, for instance, homosexuality. That's one example. Not a sin. Not a sin. It's
well, I agree 100%. I've been
sodomy
very
is a sin.
That.
Homosexuality isn't. So that's one example just to throw out there.
No, absolutely. I agree 100% that homosexuality is not a sin. I believe in fairness. And so this is how I understand homosexuality to not be a sin, is because I believe in fairness. I believe that two consenting adults ought to be able to engage in a relationship with each other as they will, because they're consenting adults. It doesn't matter if it's two men, two women, a man and a woman, transgender people, however that goes. They're two consenting adults. That makes them on even ground with everybody else. And this is how I understand the virtues. I use Aristotelian concepts for virtue of the golden mean, finding that perfect middle ground between having too much or excess and too little, or what is it? Deficiency, right? Too much or too little. Right in the middle there is the golden mean. And so justice is the golden mean between vengeance and unwarranted mercy. Courage is the golden mean between fear and recklessness. And you could look at anything in life and you could figure out for yourself by stepping back from the situation and saying, okay, what's too much and too little? Right in the middle is where the virtues lie. And this is how I come up with my own code of conduct, if you will, and how I judge my own behaviors is on this golden mean personally. But so anyway, we'll go on with that. I was curious because in our conversations, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've talked to too many people and I might be mixing you up with somebody else, but didn't you go through quite a transition of being Protestant and then irreligious and then Catholic, or am I confusing you with somebody else?
A little bit different than that. I started out atheist, and then I went and I was very vocal atheist, but this was as a young teenager. And then I became over time I became, you'd say, irreligious or agnostic after a while. And then I ended up about 19 years old, I ended up becoming Christian, and that by reading the Bible, and also the attractor was virtue. I saw virtue in Christians, and then I became Catholic after getting married at about 25, because I'm convinced that the Catholic faith is the only true religion. So somebody's awake. It's probably my child. So we'll just see how this goes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and Robin was just clarify. So, were you raised atheist? Are your parents religious, or did you just kind of go your own route as an atheist at the beginning?
I went my own route. My mother was an atheist, more or less. My dad was more spiritual. I was the only one of his children that was not baptized Catholic. Hello, sweet daughter. If you go right there and you click play, you can watch Little Bear. Okay? Because I'm working right now. Is that good? Thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the people in my chat, Robin, she's been such a joy for me to have met here through the I guess skeptic community. But Robin is one of my friends online who actually, you'll find her on both Christian channels as well as atheist channels. She's one of the few people that she's like a chameleon. She could just kind of blend in wherever she's at, and that's because she's
That's nice.
a grounded human being. She's very honest, she's empathetic, and she has a very reasonable take in a lot of things. So that really goes a long way with helping to get along with different groups of people. And she says she's got a lot of questions for you already, which is great. One thing I would like to do, if I could figure out how to do it, I don't know if I could do it during this stream. I know I have the link somewhere, but we are part of a Discord. The host is Missing Maud. She's a Christian, not a fundamentalist, I don't think. She could be really sarcastic, so I'm a little confused as to whether she's a young Earth creationist or not. But she is definitely a Christian. I know that. She's a funny lady, but she hosts a really good server that's one of the most diverse servers I've been a part of. She's got atheists, Christians, fundamentalists, young Earth creationists, all just a huge mix of people. And I know Robin's on that server. So I'm going to get a link to that server, and I probably will end up posting it in the description of this video, which, by the way, I always post links to everybody's channel that I mentioned, or to my guest channel. So Nathaniel, I'll be sure to get a link to your channel in the description once the video posts.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm a young Earth creationist. In fact, I've been doing debates now because the people want what they want. And in the debate server, I was dealing with some atheists, and they thought I was a troll because I was a young Earth creationist Catholic. They thought it was a joke. They said they'd never see that combination before, which blows my mind. That's part of the reason why I've tried to focus more attention on YouTube, because obviously you guys just don't meet as many people as you need to meet. And I'm not surprised, because my peer group that agrees with me on that kind of thing, they don't really like mixing into the internet and into like more vulgar crowds. They're more local types of people, you know what I mean? They don't want to be mistreated. And
Now,
so
my
the thing is,
sound,
you find plenty of people that don't mistreat you. It's just you got to kind of go through the
oh, you got to go through the gauntlet. That's the
yeah.
internet space. Now, real quick before we move forward, is my sound only coming through your headset, so your kids can't hear what I'm saying? Because I try to
Yes.
be polite, but I do. I'm a sailor, as you know. I right, like I build boats. That's what I do, and I do have kind of a foul mouth, so I try to be careful about it. But I may accidentally slip a little bit here and there, and just out of habit. So I want to make sure I'm not, the kids aren't having to suffer through that. So
These headphones aren't too good, but I think that as far as like you can hear what's going on, but I think that she's far enough away and she's watching.
okay, and I'll try to be mindful. Usually, when I'm around kids visually, it kind of reminds me of watch my language, and I don't get too vulgar with it, but I do tend to use the F word as kind of like an expletive for anything.
I don't have a problem with that. All in all, I mean, I've suffered so much and I've gone through a lot this last year that I mean, it's just people are pretty scrupulous about that. You'll find Catholics and Christians, you'll find people that just think that that's the worst thing you could ever do. And it's like, well, I mean, technically, if you believe in the 10 Commandments and you try to follow them, blasphemy is much worse. So if I say, oh my God, in a light, fashion that discredits the name of God, that's a mortal sin. You know what I mean? But say the F words, venial. I mean, you might cause scandal, but people are they think what they like is good. They think what they like is morally good, and they think what they don't like and what's unpleasant is morally bad.
So much of it has to do with how people are raised. I've got a very dear friend of mine, and so when I was a teenager and I was on the streets, when I started to get my life turned around and got off the streets, it was because of other people around me who were willing to help me. And I surfed a lot of couches until I could afford to get a car. Then I lived in my car for a while and just progressively turned my life around. But one of the people who helped me out when I was really young, I still know him to this day. So he's really like a brother to me in a lot of ways. So I really care about this person. However, he is not only a fundamental Christian, but he's so, I don't know how to say it other than just say arrogant, because I don't know how else to describe it. But if you swear, if I said the F word or anything like that, he acts as if I've just slapped him in the face or something. You know what I mean? Like, it just, you can't, anything like that. He acts like it's so offensive, and it just bothers me so much. I've told him this to his face. I'm like, listen, bro, don't police my language. If you don't like it, you don't have to use that kind of language, but you and I are grown adults. It's not going to hurt you. You're not going to wither away if you hear somebody cursing and swearing. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean,
no, it's true. I mean, my son, when he was 2 years old, he learned the word truck and he couldn't say truck. So he's going around at church. He was like, let's go to the truck, And so that really changed my opinion on things. Where I was like, okay, so how does God actually judge people?
I could just picture this little kid running around, truck, with not quite saying it right.
Yeah, he loves trucks. He still loves trucks.
I bet he does. Made you real popular at church too. Well, speaking of at church, though, you mentioned something that I do find a lot of pressure there. Something you mentioned is very interesting to me, because I have studied religion for many years. Catholicism, I haven't spent nearly as much time in studying, but what I have studied and what I've been exposed to is that the Catholic Church is really progressive in a lot of ways. They update a lot of things as time goes on, depending on what the Pope, is telling people. Okay, this is our new stance on LGBTQ rights or things of this nature. I mean, there's constant updates and stuff. And at one point, I was talking to a Catholic friend of mine, and he was telling me that the Catholic Church supports evolution. They support an old Earth, or however you say that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. This kind of thing. And so it's interesting when I talk to you and I hear you say that you're a young Earth creationist, because it seems to me that that's kind of the minority position within the Catholic Church. Now, again, I'm not a Catholic, so maybe I just am only exposed to this is anecdotal and I'm just missing the mark here. Are you kind of in a minority position there, or do they just?
I have no idea what the majority opinion is. I know from people I work with that in Catholic academia, the majority opinion is evolution. What's the word? Theistic
Right.
evolution.
Yep.
And I get it, but to be honest with you, the Catholic Church is a very complex thing that people don't understand. It's there to interpret the times and to explain how the perennial teaching that never changes applies to the times. So, obviously, I love the Pope. I obey the Pope. I haven't talked to him about this subject. I'd be terrified to talk to him about anything. And he's American, so it's even scarier now. And it basically, if you understand what's happened in academia since about 1900 with Pope Pius X, who was a young Earth creationist, like all the popes were, then basically the guidance that I take is, we're not going to lead with this. This is not going to work as like the hard line to hold with people. Academic and intellectual thought has become so complex and so confused, and there's so many issues that are so much more important that it's like to even explain to people how the beginning of time connects to today's time. You have to have a completely different paradigm. And from what I found out by interacting with evolutionists that I really respect, Catholic evolutionists, so Trent Horn, Dr. McAllister, I was just interacting with him on this subject, is basically I think that when you're engaged in doing good work for the church and talking with people and you follow this guidance, then you never come into that intellectual, Bishop Barron's another example, you never come into that intellectual crunch where there's just no way that Genesis 1 can be anything but literal history. It's one of the most simple parts of the whole Bible. But those people are wiser than me, and Thomas Aquinas said sometimes, if you're too engaged in abstract thinking, then you end up creating more problems than you solve, and you have to be. He was doing penance every day, and that's a big problem. Is these people aren't connected to the natural world, and that's the nature of the modern economy. So that's a big thing. I think about it constantly. And I basically am of the opinion that it shouldn't be something to create division over. That's my opinion. So, anyways,
that's what I gathered. Also, speaking with Catholic friends of mine, is that at the end of the day, that the church's stance is essentially that these are not issues worth fighting over. That you could be taken allegorically. You could take the first parts of Genesis allegorically.
Yeah.
You could take it literally. They don't determine that it has to be one way or the other. They don't. If you feel that this is even where the focus should be, that there's so much other more important things.
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to. The Catholic Church is the teacher of the world, and especially since the 70s, the problem with the Catholic Church is that it has not wanted to teach the world, because that was kind of the goal, or that was kind of the approach. It wanted peace, especially following World War II, and also because of the divisions in the Catholic Church between the modernists and the traditionalists. And that approach really has not worked. There's been a lot of problems internally to the Catholic Church because of that. But ultimately, the biggest hypocrisy in the Catholic Church that predates everything was in the 1500s, when cardinals in the Roman Curia were making a lot of money by practicing usury. That was the beginning problem, and that was never solved. And because of that, there's been a lot of follow-up that has been, obviously the Protestant Reformation followed that immediately, and it was all about money. So there's a lot to deal with. And evolution is not, it's very, very important. in certain spheres. I think, like I said, I work with people who are engaged in talking to Catholic academics and intellectuals about this issue, and that's really where it's kind of an in-house problem, and that's really where it should be solved. And basically anybody that, like for instance, I think Trent Horn could have converted Alexander O'Connor if he was applying his intellect to understanding creationism. And I think Bishop Barron could have done the same to Jordan Peterson. You know what I mean? But
Well, Jordan Peterson's kind of out there left field, but Alex O'Connor, it has been interesting to watch him over this past year. And
I haven't seen
granted,
him much this past year. I heard
yeah,
vegans
looking
were
into
complaining to him about him to me. I like him a lot.
yeah, well, he's a very sharp young man, and I find him to
He's an
be
Irishman.
very respectful. Well, God, absolutely, but no, I do find him to be very respectful in his approach. He's direct. He speaks directly to people, and I respect that as well. That's how I prefer to deal with people, is to speak directly and honestly, and accept criticism. If you're wrong, if someone can show you that they're wrong, then accept it. But Alex O'Connor does seem to be softening some of his approach to the theistic claims in certain regards. I think he wants. And I don't want to misrepresent him, so I want to be careful how I say this. But because I don't have a lot of time to take in content with around work, my own work schedule and stuff. But last I heard from him, he was saying that there were a couple of
your chat. Sorry.
Oh, there was a couple of arguments that he did find to be the most convincing. Not to say that he was convinced, but the most convincing. And one of them was the contingency argument, and I believe the other one was from intelligent design. I might be wrong about that. Contingency, I'm pretty sure, is a big one for him, that he finds to be really interesting, but fairly compelling at least. And then I think the other one is intelligent design. Now, as a designer myself, I find the intelligent design argument to be one of the least convincing arguments, to be honest with you. But that's just me personally. Alex O'Connor is not an engineer; he's a philosopher. So he and I are coming from two different, perspectives. As an engineer, design engineer myself in particular, when I look at the universe and the chaotic structure of the universe and the nature of things and how nature works, the human body, and the more I learn about the human body and biology and stuff, I don't see intelligence anywhere, and it just seems to me to be unfathomable that people would look at this and say, "Oh, it's not intelligent." Now, I do understand there's complexity, and people often misunderstand complexity with intelligence, and that's actually not. They don't necessarily map onto each other. But so many people who are not into actual design, just building products and building things and whatnot, they don't really understand that complexity is its own separate issue from intelligence. We map intelligence onto things because we are human beings and we build things, and so it seems to be a natural marriage to us. But if you separate the two things from each other, you realize that simplicity is really the hallmark of design, not complexity.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, well, simplicity is a virtue. Complexity, there's a lot of mystical things to get on about that. But basically, if I don't know how Aristotle views, we talked about psychology, which is the study of the soul, and I think that that's what psyche means. I think that I can build bridges by basically saying that the mind is the soul. You know what I mean? And I think that people are like, well, no soul exists. Well, mind exists. That's what we're talking about. The question is whether it's the brain or if it's something immaterial or what. But the intellect would be one of the, it'd be, and for lack of a better word, the top of the soul, and that the function of the intellect, at least in part, would be to be able to translate complexity and simplicity, basically be able to break things down into parts in order to understand it and in order to fix it with the will. That's, just so I don't know if that adds to what you were saying.
Trumpberger, who welcome to the channel, brother. I don't recognize your name, so it's nice to see you here. I don't know if this is for the first time or if I'm just not keeping track. I'm starting to get more followers. It's harder for me to keep up, but welcome to the stream. It's nice to see you join us. He had a question for you real quick. I know you touched on this at the beginning, but just for the people who are just joining now, he says, are you a traditional Catholic, Lutheran, or Orthodoxy?
Oh, I'm a traditional Catholic. I'm not, I don't know. I I don't really like the traditionalist crowd, and I don't want to miscommunicate. They're one of the worst groups I deal with, to be honest with you, because to them, at least functionally, the tradition that they like is really the 1950s, and that's not the tradition I like at all. So I think that's one of the worst.
So
1950s America is one of the worst things you could base your life on.
it's so modern compared to the Catholic tradition, goes back so far, and there's so much great philosophy. You mentioned Aquinas. I actually really do like Aquinas myself. I'm not a Thomist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do really admire a lot of what Aquinas does. Now, Aquinas actually draws a lot from Aristotle.
Yep.
So, and
that's what he was doing.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Aristotle. So probably a lot of what I like about Aquinas really just maps onto what I like about Aristotle. But you had mentioned something I wanted to touch on. Oh, the theistic evolution. I actually have some fundamentalist friends who were young Earth creationists. And when I explained to them, in fact, I remember I worked so I've actually worked with churches before. And not only did I attend a Bible college when I was down in Southern California, but I worked with churches. I worked as a temporary youth pastor for a while when they had a church I went to had a need. Their youth pastor was involved in some scandalous stuff, and they were in an emergency situation. And they asked if is there somebody who could take over the youth group. And I happened to be attending Bible college at the time. And so they asked me if I would. Of course, I explained to them I'm an agnostic, and they said, that's fine. We know you. You're very polite. Just please don't teach people that Jesus isn't real and God isn't real. I said, no problem. So I was very respectful of their views. I was basically just a babysitter. But then up in Oregon, I was heavily involved in athletics. And so I worked as a coach at summer camps for church summer camps and stuff like that. And so one of the gentlemen who I'd met during that time in my life, he was a fundamentalist, young Earth creationist. And I remember sitting in some lessons or whatever you want to call them, Bible studies or whatever. And they were literally just hammering on evolution with all the most ridiculous tropes that you hear about people who deny evolution. Well, if we came from monkeys, how come they're still monkeys, and all this other stuff that just, if you understand evolution, you understand how ridiculous some of these things are. And as a kid, it sounds really convincing. All these kids are like, yeah, why are there still monkeys around? But so that's how fundamental this guy was. And he was really anti-evolution. And many years later, as he and I were having lunch together, and I was talking to him about evolution and stuff, I explained to him that evolution theory does not actually have anything to do with whether or not there's a God or whether or not this God has creative powers. They're literally two separate claims. And there's actually something called theistic evolution, which is where God exists. The Bible God, the Abrahamic God exists. God, the Father, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, all that can exist. And this God created the world using evolution as the creative process. Once I explained this to him, the light kind of came on over his head, and he started doing a little bit more research into it. And now he believes in theistic evolution. So it was a very progressive step. I was really pleased, because when people do deny some of the claims that theists deny, evolution is one of them. The global flood, I know that's a talking point between us, those two things right there. And then of course, the Adam and Eve narrative, those three on the Exodus, those four things right there, I find to be problematic because of the amount of evidence that we have against these claims. In particular with evolution, there's so much evidence for evolution. And what I find is when people tend to deny those four things or affirm those four things, depending on what position they're on, it comes down to a fundamental distrust in science. Yep. And that does concern me, because I think all atheists, and I know, and agnostics are all well aware that scientists can be wrong and have been wrong in the past. Like we get that, but this seems to be a point of contention with science. They're called science deniers. I try not to use that kind of language because I feel that's kind of condescending, but it's people who literally just don't trust scientists, and they say, oh, you can't trust men. Well, it's like, that's not true, because every time you go put your key in the ignition of your car and turn that's an explosive device. You don't think that thing's going to blow up in your face, because men built that and you trust them, whether you want to admit it or not. Every time you drive that car over a bridge, you're trusting engineers that you're not going to fall down into the water, blah, blah, blah. So we actually, in our
that's a
daily
great
life,
picture. That's a great picture of what we're dealing with. It's kind of like we're in a very complex world. I mean, people don't understand how their lives work on a daily basis. I've done farming now for 5 years, and it's amazing how complex dirt is. And people don't even, I was digging a crawl space and I was trying to dig a basement. I said, well, I'll just dig and there's a basement, right? Yeah, and nope, fills with water. I had to know what the water table was. And people, people have to rely on things. And the Bible is a good example because really, honestly, yeah, you've got the Trinity. Good morning. She's just watching Little Bear. That's fine unless you want to take her. We might go for a while, at least 20 more minutes. Sorry. The Bible, let's see. Okay, so the Bible is a very complex book, right? And people just have not read it, generally speaking. I really wrecked my train of thought, but that's not, things happen. You want to help me get back on base?
We were talking about how people put more trust in men, quote unquote, and in science than they actually realize in their daily
for the
life.
Bible too. I mean, for the Bible too. It's like, people don't know what the Bible says because how could they? It's 1,000 pages, and they just go with whatever people have interpreted out of the Bible, and that's basically, and you can't blame them. I mean, you really can't, and because it's I don't think I got in trouble. So when I was a Protestant and I was leaning Baptist, I read the Bible, and I would read the Bible on YouTube. That's how I got on YouTube. And then a lot of other Bible people came and started talking to me about it, and I would talk to them about it, and I was like, "Do you guys even know what's in here?" Like for instance, we've talked about the fact that there's a genocide in there. There's a genocide that God commands, and with His speech, like what we would call a vocation to Joshua. He says, "Kill these people." You know what I mean? And so there's not any. We're not doing any service by pretending that's not in there. But the thing is, it's not that people pretend it's not in there. It's that people think the word genocide means bad, because why wouldn't you? And that's like the common culture. Just that's what genocide just means bad. You know what I mean? And so they don't ever explain anything, and they don't even know what it says. So.
Well, I have run into actually multiple theists who will literally deny certain aspects of what's in the Bible. Most of it comes from the Old Testament. There's, in fact, many Christians will intentionally, I think, or maybe it's just the way their church functions, because it could be a combination of both, but they tend to avoid the Old Testament. They'll pick and choose certain parts of it, that are inspirational, maybe something out of Psalms or the life of David. Certain aspects of it. It's not like they just.
Well, David killed some people.
Oh, David certainly did. In fact, Robin,
he's a good example.
She's not in here anymore, and I don't want to throw shade on her, but she had a couple of debates, and she did really good. She is a really good debater. I don't know if she's been doing this for a long time or what, but Robin performed very well in both debates. The first debate was whether or not America was formed as a Christian nation or built on Christianity, or I can't remember what the exact resolution was, but she did really good in that debate. The second one was about whether Christians should support the Second Amendment or not. And I was impressed with her knowledge, not only of history, but of the Bible itself. But when she brought up David, I thought, oh man, Robin, I don't know if I would have brought David into that. If you're denying that Christians should support the Second Amendment, David is not the best example because he killed a lot of people. He was a warrior, a soldier, a king, a warrior king, I guess you could maybe call it. So I thought it was kind of funny, but David, but anyway, like I said, there are a lot of people I've spoken to. In fact, there's a lady who, her and I were supposed to have a conversation about ethics and morality, and her father had passed away. So she canceled, which I totally understand. I said, take all the time you need to, she's been putting up content now. So I thought about reaching out to her, but I've seen a couple of her videos, and her and a couple of her co-hosts literally are denying that chattel slavery is in the Old Testament. And they will take verses out of context to make it seem like it's all indentured servitude. And I've seen this happen many times. And it's just the cognitive dissonance, it's like they just cannot come to terms with some of these things. And I personally don't like the justification for these things. I think we should call these things bad, because I do believe in the objective morality, which makes all human beings equal and of equal value.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
and so I just,
Yeah,
I
it's just about category error because bad is one thing, sin is another. You know what I mean? And the thing,
well,
like
yeah, I
the
think if by definition sin is simply an act against God's will, and we just define it, that would be my understanding of sin. It's not
that's a decent
necessarily
definition.
good or bad.
But the
Yeah.
point is, it's an act. The point is, it's an act, and so that's why it's like, well, is for instance, if I said, is genocide a sin? Probably the right answer would be probably, because then you have to parse out, well, what was the action that a person did? You know what I mean? Slavery is a really good example because it's a state of life. You're a slave. Most people are slaves. They're not masters, and that's the biggest mistake. For some reason, people who I'm an Irishman, and the Irish were slaves that were very abused in the American experiment.
Well, don't
And
forget about the Irish slave trade. A lot of people, and I'm Irish as well, and I know from my family history, there actually was an Irish slave trade for about 300 years. The Scandinavians came down and took Irishmen and sold them into Europe and stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly.
That was going
Well,
on. That was
I mean,
major.
the biggest thing was, I guess I would want to learn more about that, but I can picture the time of history. They're probably around like shortly after Charlemagne with the Vikings. Yeah, that
Yep.
makes sense to me.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing, and in fact, I'm reading a book right now about economics, and it talks about the fact that pagan economics has that kind of slavery, and it has a degradation of labor, and it compares it to the Christian economics where there's a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a respect for human labor that kind of undergirds everything, and in Christian society, where it's like Jesus Christ is a carpenter, Saint Joseph was a carpenter. Most of the saints are carpenter. The average, or they're laborers. The average poor person has this honor. You know what I mean? And so that's not to say slavery didn't exist. But my whole point is that slavery is not a sin because it's not an act. It's a state of life, and you're a slave or you're a master. And when people try to justify slavery from the Christian perspective, I think they're like programmed to approach it as if they were the masters. I remember working at a factory with a dude in the South, and I'm from the North. I was born in New Hampshire, and I was talking to him, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, dude, you and me here making $15 an hour, we never owned slaves. You know what I mean? Our ancestors didn't own slaves. Why? Who are the people who own slaves? I don't know. I haven't met them. But it's like most of the white people were not, these like masters of giant plantations or whatnot. And honestly, if we're just talking about American slavery, that holds water because the whole idea of a white man is kind of an American invention to basically make the white slaves enemies with the black slaves so that they wouldn't be enemies with the masters. To kind of create this brotherhood between the slave and the master and create this division. And, that's an historical fact.
I do see a lot of this gets used to create division. I think that, and I don't try to promote conspiracy theories myself. I try to be very careful about that. But I do think that there is one theory, and it can be considered a conspiracy theory. That's fair enough. But it's where basically you have the true division, in my opinion, and you can see this historically. It's not just in America. I see it all over the world. It's between the haves and the have-nots, the rich versus the poor. It has nothing to do with skin color, sex, gender, social status. None of that matters. It's literally like the wealthy versus the unwealthy. That's the real division, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Now,
definitely today, because I'll just say briefly what I claimed earlier, that usury was the first problem 500 years ago. Anybody who understands usury, which by the way gives birth to empire, it cycles all the wealth to a smaller group of people. That's how it works. That's the problem with it. You know what I mean? So yeah, today definitely true. There's people who have, and there's people who have not, because it's been operating for a long time. You know what I mean?
I think that we're at a point to where people need to start recognizing these things, because if we
Sure.
would start working together, this is what I try to promote on this channel and what I do. I have a lot of interactions online on other platforms. And in one platform I'm on in particular, I'd say 80 to 90% of the people I interact with are overseas. Very few people are actually from America or even from the North American continent. Most everybody is overseas. And it's really interesting to see the perspective they have of America and of Americans. It's also, we were talking about this in the back room before we started, and I'll mention it to the chat here. It's quite surreal for me to speak to these people, because while many of them are educated, there are some of them are kids who are just younger people, and all of them across the board are so well informed. Well, I don't know, well informed. They're so aware of what's happening in America. They're asking
Yeah.
me about ICE. They're asking me about Donald Trump. They're asking me about immigration. They're asking me about all the stuff that we are going through here in America. People from Bangladesh are asking me about, right? And I'm
Yeah.
just like, why America? We are in the spotlight. And I think that we realize subconsciously that we're kind of like the top dog in the world, right? We're one of the most economically viable. Our GDP is the highest. Our military is the strongest, whatever it might be. English and the US dollar is the most prevalent language and currency, et cetera, so on and so forth.
Yeah. I
But I
mean, we
don't think
conquered
we
the world in
really
1945.
recognize
That's what
just
happened.
how much we are in the spotlight. We are center stage on the world stage, and people are watching us.
Mhm.
And we are not setting a very good example of what diversity and capitalism, the benefits of this are. Because I tell people all the time online, I'm like, they ask me about America, and I tell them, I say, listen, I get more frustrated than a lot of people in America because I'm an independent centrist. So I don't align with any of these issues. I have a very middle of the road approach to almost everything that's happening in this country. So I get very frustrated. But I will tell you that I still think that America is one of the greatest countries, if not the greatest country in the world, because of its diversity. That diversity is what has made us who we are. Immigration, this country was built on immigration. And we need to show this to the world that we actually support this, because this is our roots right here. People come from all over the world to contribute to our medical system, science, religions, culture, everything down to art, cuisine, music. I mean, we have so much diversity here compared to so many other places, and it makes us really beautiful, and it also makes us very strong. But it's almost like it's like our strength is being used against us in politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I had this conversation with a tech. I live in Texas, so diversity is definitely a conversation down here for everybody. um, the thing is when you say America, the question is, what are you talking about? Because I'm a big believer in history. I think that is the best way to interpret what's happening now. You need to have a complete idea of history, at least back to 2000 BC, to really know what you're talking about. And honestly, if you compare America, if you compare the United States, the continental United States, let's say, and even cut off Alaska and Hawaii, which you really shouldn't, but if we just talk about that, that is not a nation. You know what I mean? Even country kind of doesn't get the doesn't give you like an historical understanding of what's going on, because there's a huge difference between East Texas and West Texas. There's a huge difference between California. There's a huge difference between Washington State on the left side of the Cascades and the east side of the Cascades. These are completely different cultures, completely different regions, completely different people. So yeah, no kidding. I mean, if we took all of Europe and we said this is very diverse, or if we took all of Asia and we said this is very diverse, and it's important for it to be diverse, because otherwise, what do you have? Africa, very diverse. It's important for it to be diverse, or you're going to ruin what it is on a fundamental level. Yeah, but that's one thing. And then it's completely different to say that that diversity should be enforced from the top all the way to the bottom. You know what I mean? Or here or there. I mean, like, should Dallas be diverse? Should Plano be diverse? Should Baltimore be diverse? It's really a question. And it's a question of it's not just like, we can't just say, well, you know, basically when the civil rights era was happening, you had Catholic neighborhoods. People were identified that way. Martin Luther King got hit by a brick because I think a Lithuanian hit him with a brick, not because he was black, but because he wasn't Lithuanian. You know what I mean? It didn't think of himself as a white person. Well, when this happened by a lot of people who really hate black people, if you ever read or if you ever look into Lyndon B. Johnson with his Great Society, he hates black people. When this happened and they forced black folks into these white neighborhoods, well, that's what gave birth to it. Then you had white flight, then you had the suburb, and we can't even say that I think bad thing. I think it was a bad thing. But we can't say just undoing that would fix it, because now we have the reality of, 50, 60 years later, completely different generations. And it's hard. It's hard to say how to fix an American city. But, there's been a long time of kind of a, like you said, the haves, the plutocrats, the moneyed people, have been doing social experiments in America basically since before 1776, and it makes it a very complex issue. And my personal opinion is that America can't really be governed on a wide stage. It's too big, it's too complex, and our way of governing it right now basically involves entertaining people and trying to dispel their anger. But giving more money out would be a very good way to start.
Yeah, I think that that poverty seems to be the root of a lot of problems. I know there are people that say correlation does not equal
Indebtedness.
causation, and I agree with that to a certain extent, depending on what you're arguing for. However, you can certainly look at a situation and take out the majority of certain statistics and then correlate it to over here and look at the repercussions on the behaviors and stuff. There's a reason that the majority of the people who are incarcerated come from low income situations. And of course, the majority of those low income situations tend to come from minority groups, like African American or whatever it might be, Hispanic, Latino, so on and so forth. So there is certainly a correlation between how much wealth somebody has to their propensity, their tendency to whether or not they're going to commit crimes, because so much crime is motivated by lack of wealth, lack of resources.
Well, and the thing is too, I think that that's artificial. I think that, see, I've realized this because I've been poor and I've been okay. And I came from upper middle class. That's how I started. My parents got divorced. I went into poverty, bad poverty, grew up in a black neighborhood, but so I've had experiences. And when I became Catholic, I started pursuing poverty because Jesus was poor. The apostles were poor. Being poor is a good thing in the eyes of God. But when you realize that to be poor, you have to make money because of the way the system's designed, because you have to pay bills, you have to keep a roof over your head. Whereas traditionally speaking, historically, a poor man did not have to fight to survive every day in this way. He didn't have to have this sort of mental illusory pressure coming from digital currency or even paper currency. That's a very artificial thing. And I connect it to evolution. I'm not saying that evolution is the same thing, but the idea of survival of the fittest being applied to economics in England, what people commonly called social Darwinism, is basically the origins of this problem. Is you make it so it's very, very hard to survive unless you have some kind of wealth, and then with this idea that the best people are the only ones who should survive. And then of course, yeah, people are killing each other. That's what competition means. That's literally survival of the fittest. That's what it means. You know what I mean? And the same thing, not just with violence and crime, but also with marriage and with reproduction, and what people talk about with like hypergamy and stuff like that. So,
well, I don't know. I think I understand what you're saying, but I think at a fundamental level, I might have a disagreement. Social Darwinism, that's really a whole that we could have a whole conversation about that, because I think that so many people use this terminology, and I find it to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what Darwinism actually is compared to how societies actually evolve and what happens within societal structures. Because
Right.
once you get into economic structures of the poor, the middle class, and the upper class, and then the very wealthy, there's so much to be said there to unpack there that doesn't actually map onto what Darwin was talking about with survival of the
Sure.
fittest. Because cooperation is ultimately what survival of the fittest really means. And nature has this great way of balancing itself out. Everything balances out within nature naturally, right? The lion can't take too many deer out of the forest, because then the lion will starve. He'll starve himself out, right? The deer can't
Right.
eat too much of the grass, because then the deer will starve itself out. There has to be this natural balance, and
Right.
nature just kind of works like this. Societies, because we are a social species, we must work together. Cooperation is paramount. This is what I build my whole model on objective morality ultimately on, as the foundation is cooperation. So many
Yeah.
people like to isolate into little pockets, into little social groups, right? And we see this in politics, religion, social classes. We see this all over the world. And the problem is that we're now isolating ourselves from the rest of the species, and these are actually our brothers and sisters. There's no difference between, you and I and people in Africa and people in Asia and anybody anywhere else. We're all human beings. We got to have food on our plate. We got to have a roof over our heads, a coat on our back, provide for our children, right? So we're all the same. We at the fundamental level. But when we start to get this in group, out group, suddenly now we try to epistemically justify actions against each other that we would never justify within our own group, right? This becomes really problematic, and it's a broken view, in my opinion. It's when we start looking at the focusing on the small picture and forget about the bigger picture. We're ultimately living on one planet. We're one species of animal. However you want to phrase it is fine with me, but ultimately human beings are human beings, and we're all supposed to be cooperating together, just like every other species does. You fit within your environment. You don't take too much from the environment, because you're ultimately starving yourself out of your own resources. But people, because we have this, it's a blessing and a curse, so to speak. We have the ability to terraform our environment, which is a very unique skill among animals, right? Is to terraform things. And we're really bad about taking way more than the planet can give in very specific situations, or than communities can give in social evolution.
Well, there's a lot to be said there. I mean, you're a boat builder, and I think there's probably something, there. Okay, so there's two things I want to talk about. First off is I'm more agrarian. You know what I mean? I personally think that men in the pursuit of virtue have a certain connection to their geography. That's not to say every man, but they have a certain connection to their geography that does differentiate them from other nations, and then they have a connection between their ancestry too, and their history and their ancestry, and that's worth going through. And I actually don't believe that technology is ever really going to separate that. I think that, and that comes from my idea of science. I don't really think we live on a planet, technically speaking. I think we have creation, and I think it's sufficient for us. And I think that it's overly abundant, actually. And I think that its flaws and its limitations come from the lack of virtue and the sin that men have, and they're there to basically cause men to be more virtuous. But cooperation is a very fascinating thing, and I have said this, and that's probably where, from an evolutionary standpoint, I think that's where people are making a lot of progress. I paid my friends who work in creationism, in academia, to do some research for me and please put out something, because I'm trying to explain to people, Catholics to Christians, that when you work in business, it's not about competition and survival of the fittest. It's not about killing off the weakest and doing all these kinds of practices just to succeed. And and that's been a problem for a long time, at least 500 years amongst Christians, where they come into the economic the economic sphere, and they act like God doesn't exist 9 to 5. And well, and you know, you could probably say it like that because we're all human, and humanity has succeeded because of cooperation and the social aspect of it, which God teaches us in Genesis 1. You know, because of that, there's no reason why we should go into business and work with people and just treat our competition without any kind of consideration. You know what I mean? So I think from on a philosophical level, there's a lot of work to be done there, in talking about competition and cooperation. I really have to use the bathroom. It's my fault for chugging that coffee right before we started.
No, that's no problem. Go ahead and do your thing. I'll make some announcements while you're gone.
Okay, and I'll be back, and maybe I can give you another, like, because you want people to talk. Let me check. If I check with my wife, our dinner is at 5. If I check with my wife, I might be able to give a whole hour. So let me do that, and I'll come back. I'll let you know how much time I can have.
And that's no problem. You're welcome to come and go as you please. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here.
Well, and I want to answer these people because I've been watching the chat. I've been trying to give you my main attention, you know. But
yeah, I'm really bad. Yeah, go ahead, do your thing. Let me tell the people I'm going to open up the panel here for them.
Awesome. Okay,
that'll be great. Right back. Okay. In fact, I'll do that right now. So everybody just heard me say that. So yeah, every Sunday I do an open panel on these live streams. Oftentimes I will have a scheduled guest. It helps me out because it keeps the content fresh. I don't have to just create, come up with every idea myself because I'm not very creative, as many of you may know. But so the point of it is that I do still do an open panel, even if I have a guest. I think it's a little bit more fluid if we try to ask the guest topic that we've been discussing. That's not required. You guys are welcome to bring up anything that you like. I try to make this basically it's our place together. It's a space that we share, and I'm willing to talk about anything myself. I do expect everybody to be polite to each other, right? We can push back on each other's ideas. I actually encourage that. I welcome any challenges to something that I've said, and any corrections I'm happy to accept. But I do appreciate if you guys will be polite to each other, because that's the whole point of why I started this channel, is to bring different ideas together, to teach people that we can basically, at the end of the day, if we have to, agree to disagree, so to speak. So if we can't come to common ground, then we need to accept that the lowest common denominator is that we're all human beings, right? We are, just like you probably heard me say to Nathaniel, I believe in this global cooperation type of thing, but that does not mean I think we need to have one religion or non-religion, one political system, one culture. No, I don't think that at all. But I think that we need to have this common understanding that we're all human beings, and we have to learn to work together in spite of our differences, right? And then learn to maybe even celebrate our differences. So that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. I can only do that with your guys' help and cooperation. So I appreciate you guys being on board with that. And I do appreciate all the support that we've gotten on this channel. For those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I think we've built it up. I've been doing this on my own now for a couple months, just over 2 months. We've topped 160 subscribers already, coming on to like 15,000 views on the videos. Those numbers are staggering to me. And I'm really grateful that you guys are all a part of this. And it wouldn't be growing without you. I can only do so much by myself, and I can't really do that much. I'm very limited on time because of my job, and I just took on more responsibility at work. I've also got a wife and a home to take care of, and so on and so forth. Just like everybody, I've got a full plate. So it's really growing because of a lot of the outreach that you guys have been doing and networking and stuff that you guys have been doing. So I really appreciate all the support. I'm going to go ahead and I think post the link in the chat. See if I can do that. It's up here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Oh, that's not good. I'm hitting too many buttons here. I'm really a hazard to myself in more ways than one. Copy. I'll put this link here in the chat. I think I got it figured out. Okay. I think I've been trying to pin this. Did that even come up? I've been trying to pin this as a comment, and I realize I think I have to actually do that through YouTube. So while Nathaniel is getting himself together, what the hell am I doing with this? Let me see if I can log on to YouTube really quick. I can't do it through my PC because I run the stream through StreamYard, and if I open up YouTube at the same time on my PC, it creates this major lag. but I think I could just get on my phone here. I don't know if I could even come into my own. I never actually tried doing it this way. You have to bear with me here. I really like when it comes to technology. I'm really I'm not good at this shit. I just after I sold my boat business, I was so stressed out. Oh, let's mute that. So stressed out from everything that I just separated myself from technology in so many ways that after a few years, technology grows so fast. You know, pretty soon I couldn't even figure out how to open up my own emails.
Hello.
Okay.
I have basically, Mom's going to cook dinner, so I'm going to try to go all the way to 5 o'clock. Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how to pin this comment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but I can't. If I hit the button, it just logs me onto the StreamYard. I don't know how to
see.
Oh, I could pin somebody else's message.
I'm pretty sure I know this person. Messiah substitute. Maybe not though. It's not technically true that Jews were commanded to exterminate Amalek, unless you mean it like as a part signifying the whole. The Israelites were commanded to.
The Saul, I think the Amalekites was Saul, and if I remember right, it was Saul who was commanded to kill the Amalekite men, women, and children and animals. That's I think 1 Samuel.
Yeah, and Saul wasn't a Jew. He was
no, there weren't.
Benjamin.
Benjamin. The Jews weren't really a thing at that early stage yet.
Right. No, it's the thing. People, it's like, you know, the Bible purports to cover all of history from before Christ to after Christ by like you know, a certain 50 years or so like that. So and then Apocalypse is all of the rest of it. Now, not all of it, because it really is not talking about most of history after Christ, but I mean, even if you're making that claim, you'd imagine the book is not very simple. You know what I mean? I used to always get mad. It's not, you know, it's not like what Christians say about it. None of it's true when you actually read it. It's not an instruction book. It's not a love letter. I mean, it's not even, it's not the basis of the Christian religion. It's, you can't read the Bible honestly and come up with a way of living just from reading it. You'd have to pick and choose, and you'd have to have somebody tell you how to do that, or it'd have to be random. It's just not, you know, that's not what it is.
Well, I think that scholars, critical scholars in particular, have pointed this out, and I agree. From having attended Bible college myself, having read through the Bible, there are a couple books I haven't spent much time in, just because one, I find numbers to be extremely boring, and then Revelations.
I love numbers, actually. I really do like numbers.
I just can't get through the generations of generations of generations and who begot who and so on and so forth. I tried to read that book about 5 or 6 times, and I get about half. I think the furthest I've gotten is about halfway through it. I'm like, I just can't do this. I thought about one interesting thing to do would be to do genealogies. Mm-hmm. Right, through numbers, to keep myself more interactive with it, but I haven't done that yet. But that might be a way to keep my focus. I do have ADD pretty bad, so sometimes it's hard for me to just stay focused on mundane things. And the book of Revelations, I've read it a couple times all the way through, but I literally have no idea what they're talking about. There's so much allegory in that, you know, and I've listened to a couple people who are really good Bible scholars talk about Revelation. It's a fascinating book. But I myself personally get really lost in Revelations. But every other book in the Bible I've read at least once, fairly good understanding of what they're talking about. And I certainly haven't committed it to memory. But
what do you think of Daniel?
Daniel is actually one of my favorite books, but that's because I really like the stories. And of course, my name is Daniel, so as a child, I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. And then I really like the stories, the fiery furnace and the lion's den. These are just great stories. That's the whole story of Daniel, you know, and the author of Daniel does a really good job visually in the way he writes and painting this picture. But I'm in line with critical scholarship. I think it was written during the Maccabean Revolt, 165-ish, you know, is my feeling about that. I've actually had debates about the book of Daniel, about historical errors that are being made regarding Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar, Darius the Mede.
Okay, that's where you got that from. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of archaeological evidence that essentially refutes a lot of those claims. We have the lineage of Nebuchadnezzar. We know who Belshazzar's father was. We know who Nabonidus's lineage was. We know how Nabonidus took the throne. We have evidence of this stuff, through the. I have notes actually over here. I could get into it if we want to discuss Daniel at some point. But there's also the 70 weeks prophecies. Those
What do
get
you think
broken
about?
down. Yeah, so there are a lot of
What do you think about? Okay, I get it. I do get it. I'm not so skilled at all these. Right now I'm trying to work through the Henrys of England, so my mind's not in Belshazzar or whatever.
No, that's a long ways removed from that.
Yeah, and I take it at face value. I think, and the thing is, the Henrys of England are way more fascinating to me in a lot of different ways. Although I will say that, so what I do, and maybe because you don't take it seriously, I don't know, but I don't know how seriously you take it. But like the symbolism that is in Daniel, particularly like with the materials, especially once you now it's through the stories too. So, like the first Daniel 1, and it's one of the most geometric books as far as like there's a structure to it where it's almost like these chapters you couldn't break them down any other way. And like first Daniel, they reject meat and they have vegetable pulse, and that's a start, you know what I mean? And these are natural substances. And then the second Daniel, if I can remember correctly, is when he's killing all the wise men and he has this vision. And this vision is gold, silver, bronze, iron, clay, right? You know what I'm talking about? And
Yes,
then
absolutely, yep.
and then a stone, and the stone is Jesus Christ in the church. So it's this natural substance coming into contact with all these artificial substances, and it interprets it. These are kingdoms. These are things made by men. And then the next chapter, he makes a golden statue, and the people of God with an angel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are put into a furnace. You know what I mean? And so a smelter. You know what I mean?
Right, smelting.
All of these materials, and in fact, it kills the people who put them in that. But all these materials are all smelted. You know what I mean? Or fired in the case of clay. You know what I mean? These are substances that are natural, but man purifies them. That's what makes them artificial, and then makes things out of them. And it's actually the statue that makes this happen. But then, so there's that vision, and it's all, there's a very heavy. You were talking about psychology. I've been studying psychology, and it's interesting when you start talking about the Eastern. If you start talking to the Eastern Orthodox, because they don't like the Catholics, and the reason they don't like the Catholics is largely because of Aristotle. So that might be a very interesting interaction. They don't like Thomas Aquinas, and they don't like Aristotle, and but they do like psychology. In fact, Freud and all of them he draws, and Jung's a little bit more occultic, but Freud draws from the church fathers, especially the Eastern church fathers. So anyway, so there's all this dream interpretation that Daniel's doing. God calls him the wise man. He lists him with Moses and Job, maybe not Moses, when in Ezekiel, Daniel, and then you read the book of Daniel, and he's just interpreting dreams. And he even says, like, this is God, not me, And then, so he's doing all these interpretation of dreams, and that matters. People are dying because of it. The king kills all the wise men. And then the next chapter, God does what you might call a waking dream, where there's a hand and it's writing on stone, and it's writing words that nobody even understands. And the words have to do with working with materials, measure, reject, divide. But he's writing on stone. And so there's this very fascinating progression um, all related to these materials. You know what I mean? So, and people say, it's written in my Bible in the footnotes. It's written in most Bible in the footnotes. It's like, okay, iron represents the Roman Empire, gold represents the Babylonians, and that kind of thing. And well, I mean, a lot of people, the founding fathers associated America with the Roman Empire, and this has been these things have affected Western history. The Book of Daniel and his interpretations and Rome and all these kinds of pictures of the Iron Beast has actually affected people who've led Western history and decided and formed nations and formed governments. You know what I mean? America was formed with with Daniel's Iron Beast in mind. That's almost what they were. That's what George Washington emulated. That's what a lot of them did. So, anyways.
Well, I think there's a lot of symbology. I think the book itself is incredibly advanced. You see this, and this is one of the things I was going to mention. When you kind of brought up Dan, I was in the middle of talking about there with critical scholarship, and what I've noticed in my studies of the Bible is that there isn't a univocality, especially when you talk about the Christian or Catholic Bible. You've got the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, which is the Christian's Old Testament, and then you map the New Testament onto it. There just isn't a univocality, that you have to read so much, and critical scholarship is in agreement that you take things out of context to tie it together. Now, some people can make the claim that there's a divine inspiration that's helping them to understand this, and obviously that's a supernatural claim that I can't really contest either way. But just if you take the scholarship, what the scholarship is saying, the Jews, there's a reason they reject Jesus as the Messiah. There's a reason they reject, the New Testament and stuff. And I think it's a really fundamental reason that does get kind of hand waved away by Christians and all the different sects of Christianity. It seems strange to me that the Christians seem to think that they have a better handle on the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, than what the Jews themselves and the Jewish interpretation of things.
Oh, there's a reason for that. I mean, there's an historical reason for that.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. I have no doubt. But one of the things that strikes me, for example, one of the very interesting denominations of Christianity is called preterism, right? Full preterism, and they rely heavily on the Book of Daniel, right? And the New Age, New Earth, also from the Old Testament, right? The New Kingdom and stuff. And so their whole interpretation of these passages from the Old Testament gives this epistemology, this hermeneutic that puts Jesus' return at 70 AD, right? And which no other Christian denomination agrees with this, and critical scholars don't agree with this. There isn't a single seminary, accredited seminary, that teaches full preterism that I'm aware of. You know what I mean? So this is just such an outlier position. Right. Daniel gets used in so many ways by so many different groups, and that shows you just how much this text can be manipulated one way or the other. But I think as far as being an advanced writing, I think this really shows its origin. It's kind of shows its hand there as being a much later or more modern, however you want to look at that. Because when you get before the Common Era, when you say later or newer, everything is technically reversed, right? Because we're working towards zero. But so the more modern dating of Daniel, like around like I said, around the Maccabean revolt, it makes more sense, because when you look at the Book of Daniel, how it's constructed, the things that you were just talking about, the systematic, the typology, the symbolism, all of this stuff, it is so advanced in its structure as a literary piece compared to something like Ezekiel or anything else that's written before this, right? Even Amos or Job or some of the older books, that, not to say that they aren't really skilled writers. I think one of the things I really like about
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain sense of like haphazardness, and I kind of, I really don't like the Protestant habit of like chapter and verse, because chapters and verses kind of impart a certain interpretation that you don't even realize that you're following, because you divide it this way. And Daniel stands out as being one that's very unique. I mean, like I said, that's why the Bible, and especially the Old Testament, cannot be the foundation of your religion, because depending on what you mean by that, it can't teach you your religion unless you have an extraordinary grace. Did you knock him over? Okay, maybe I have to deal with that. Okay, my son got hurt. Well, okay, so basically, yep. All right, he's coming over here. Okay, basically, that's why you got to be Catholic before you can interpret the Bible. All right. No, I don't want you on screen. All right. Now I have to go. But God
Yep.
bless you, sir. This has been
It was
very
so great
fun.
to have you on, Nathaniel. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll get into some things. Maybe you and I will have a discussion about the flood myth one of these days, and or a
Yeah,
debate.
I've got, I mean, obviously you're going to be better at that. So our agreement, I think, should stand that if I
I
get
will.
to study your
Yeah,
argument,
I will post that, or I will post my talking points on a video, and then you'll have plenty of preparation material.
awesome. And I want to do that to serve you, because yeah, you need some real competition. So I'm
Yeah,
going
I
to do
don't
my
mind.
best.
I
I'm
don't
a
mind
good
getting my
debater.
arguments out there. Yeah, it's good to see you, brother. I'll catch up with you.
God bless you.
And I'll announce your upcoming debates with A's and the other friend of mine as well. You still want to do those, right?
Yeah, and let me
Okay.
know. Let me know if anyone's got questions I should have answered too, so I can address that kind of stuff. And also, I had a debate on the First Amendment, and it didn't go too great as far as like it wasn't set up too well. So I would like somebody else to do. I'm against the First Amendment, and I'd like somebody to debate me on that. God bless you.
All right. I'll see if I can find you an opponent. Yeah, good to see you, brother. Before you get into it, let me just make a couple of announcements here. He had to cut out really quickly because of family obligations, which we all understand that. It was nice to have Nathaniel come by. I think he's the first Catholic I've had on my channel, so it's always nice to get different points of view. Nathaniel, I've been looking for someone to debate me on the global flood myth for a long time, and I get a lot of people who will talk shit in the comment section, but every time I say, well, let's have a debate about it, that nobody wants to debate the global flood myth. So Nathaniel, he said that he would be willing to actually have that debate with me, but he wants a handicap because he knows that I'm probably that's a debate that I'll be very strong in as a boat manufacturer. That's one of the angles that I could attack is the whole concept of the magic zoo boat. It's just absolutely impossible from a marine technology standpoint. There was no rickety wooden boat full of animals and fresh water and all that bullshit. But so what I told Nathaniel I would do is I'll go ahead and basically present my argument in a video. Then he can study that video, and then we can have the debate, and he'll have all my talking points he can prepare for and stuff. I'm happy to do that for him because I don't think he can make an argument in defense of the flood. It's just been refuted by every field of science. So he's got so much legwork to do there. The other thing I was going to mention is, speaking of debates, Nathaniel, there's another friend of mine who's going to be my guest next week. He's spoken on this channel once before. His name is A's Philosophy. He's an interesting Christian because he rejects Paul. He rejects the divinity of Jesus. He rejects the Gospel of John, but he's still a Christian. So his take is really unique. It's always a joy to talk to him to try and figure out where he's actually coming from. But he wants to debate with Nathaniel regarding, I think that debate is going to be about Paul, whether Paul contradicts Jesus. And then Nathaniel wants to debate a Muslim friend of mine on the divinity of Jesus. So Nathaniel's got, he's just stacking up opponents left and right. So I'll keep you guys posted on that. Let me get this off my screen because I'm not going to need this. Okay, Scott, go ahead and introduce yourself, introduce your channel, tell everybody what you've got going on while I fix this here.
Okay, no problem. Hey guys, nice to be on the channel again, and back with OE again. My name is Scott. I've got a show called The Mirror Point, and me and my co-host, we talk about philosophy of mind, religion, spirituality, mysticism, just all kinds of weird stuff, physicalism. We try to do debates. And yeah, man, I'm happy to be talking to you again. I know my voice probably sounds a little rough. I've been trying to fight a cold and all of that nastiness, so I'm just kind of getting over that. But yeah, just listening in. I like Nathaniel a lot. He came on my show once, I think a couple weeks ago, and we had a really great conversation. And really nice guy. And yeah, I'd love to see a debate between you and A, and really anybody. And again, you had mentioned in the chat about your video with objective morality. And as you know, like for me, I probably agree with you more than disagree, but I like to always provide healthy pushback just for the intellectual exercise back and forth. And again, like if you ever still want to debate, I can do a still man and try to come up with a subjective moral argument against you just for the fun of it. Not that I'm really that way, as you already know that, but just what I like to do just for the intellectual fun and everything.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the interaction that video has gotten. For one thing, as you know, I like to have people, look at things that I'm doing critically and to give me honest feedback. I mean, obviously, it's always nice to have people agree, but it's really valuable to get people's disagreements, especially when they're being sincere and intellectually honest about it, because it forces me to think more critically about things. And that video, it's I can't believe that it's coming up. I didn't check here recently, but it was over 200 some views in just a couple of days, which for my small channel, that's quite a bit for a video like that. And the comments, there's almost as many comments as well, I don't know if there's 200 comments, but there's a lot of comments on there. That video got a lot of attention in just a short time already. There's so many people had something to say about that. I was a little bit surprised that it got that much attention. Most of the comments that I've noticed aren't actually addressing the argument that I made in the video. Some of it is focused on the syllogisms that I put out. And then some of it just seems to be kind of coming out of left field, typical arguments that I hear in favor of subjective morality. But a lot of that stuff I actually addressed and talked about in the video. So either people didn't watch the video, they just commented based on the title, or they missed because maybe I didn't communicate clearly enough or articulate myself, well enough in the video itself, and people just missed it. I'm not quite sure where the disconnect there is, because a lot of the comments that came just seemed to be like, well, I've already actually discussed this, and I didn't want to type out this whole long argument that I'd already talked about in the video, but I did get into quite a bit of that. The one thing I will say, though, the syllogisms are broken, and I keep trying to come up with a syllogism that's leading to a sound conclusion. I've overcome the first hurdle, which is creating a valid syllogism, but valid and sound is not the same thing, right? And so I haven't landed the plane on that. And Deconverted Man, he studies, for anybody who doesn't know, he does a lot of discussions about logic, informal and formal logic on his channel, syllogistic logic and stuff like that as well. So he really, or syllogistic arguments, excuse me. So he knows a lot about this. He's written, I think, 3 or 4 books about this type of topics, ethics and logic. And I first spoke to him after one of my first debates about this, when I had my first syllogism, and he invited me onto his channel, and he and I had a talk about it. And he said, you've got a really interesting argument, but he said, your syllogism isn't working. And he said, you're going to have a really difficult time coming up with a syllogism that actually works for this. He said, your best bet is to actually write a book about it and do like an essay form argument, right? And break down each of your points into different chapters. So I started doing this. This was a few months ago, but with my new promotion at work and everything else that's going on, I haven't done really much of any work on that book at all. I did come up with like a kind of an outline, so what am I going to do? How am I going to format the book or whatever, but I haven't done much with it. But I think that after trying so many different syllogisms, I'm on my, I don't even know, 10th attempt at syllogism for this. And I just haven't landed that plane yet. So I think Deconverted Man is probably right. It probably is not going to be something that I'm going to be able to successfully do. I may have to just do like an essay form, but it would be based on the argument that I laid out in the video. Nobody has been able to refute that thus far.
Yeah, I can understand that too, because, whenever it comes to certain topics like even consciousness, morality, things that are usually considered in the realm of subjectivity, first person sort of approaches to topics. Those are really hard to form syllogisms, because the strength of those sort of things come from objective sort of pointers. So it's easy to ground, say, if we're making a syllogism, say, to promote why the world is round or something like that. It's because, we have a lot of information to draw from objectively. But when we're talking about something like morality and we're trying to turn it into a subjective or an objective sort of category, it becomes a little difficult because, as you know, we have this thing called intersubjectivity,
Mm-hmm.
where it's kind of like a little bit of both, and just kind of like dependent on how you approach it, you can easily dismiss one side or the other by just focusing on one side or the other. You can say, well, and I think that's why a lot of people fail to engage in the argument that you laid out. How you were goals, and the evolution kind of like grounds the goal setting, because if it's an objective fact that organisms um you know cooperate in survival, and there's a will to survive in nature and all of that, you would think that's enough, because actually most philosophers are moral realists, and they usually ground their stuff in either theism or something like natural will, stuff like that. And so that's where they get at that sort of objective sort of approach. But as long as people can say, yeah, but as long as I have a goal, yeah, we can talk about objective ways to get to that goal. But how, Daniel, are you going to say that my goal should be to survive? Yeah, you can make that naturalistic fallacy and say, well, nature prefers that organisms survive and procreate and all of that, and cooperation has been a valuable tool evolution utilizes to get to that goal. Therefore, goals are objective. But somebody could turn around and say, yeah, but what about the person who wants to kill themselves for reasons? Then you've got that problem, and that's resting solely on subjectivity.
Yeah, so I don't actually think that there is an objective goal. I think all goals are subjective. It's the categorical imperative or the hypothetical imperative. And the reason that philosophers and myself use that approach is because of what's called the is-ought problem. So the is-ought breaker is done through the hypothetical imperative. Let me just really quick here. Dr. Norton has joined the chat. He's always a pleasure to talk to. He's an objectivist, actually, believes in Ayn Rand's philosophy, and he does a lot on his channel. I'll make sure to get a link to that in the description. I've had some really good conversations with Dr. Norton. We have some, I think, fundamental disagreements. Like a lot of it focuses or revolves around free will. I personally don't believe in libertarian free will, and free will is a key part of Ayn Rand's philosophy, but I think a lot of that's in the definition. So we don't always agree on everything, but I definitely really value Dr. Norton's input. I think he's got a lot of interesting things to say about capitalism, Ayn Rand's view on that. It's been a really interesting study for me, which I credit to having met Dr. Norton. So I was actually supposed to be getting into Schopenhauer, and then he was next on my list. And then I met Dr. Norton, and now Ayn Rand bumped Schopenhauer down one notch. So it's been really fascinating. So I'm going to pin the link again or paste it in the comments. I couldn't pin it. I don't know why I'm having a hard time doing that, but let me get a link just in case anybody wants to join the conversation. Dr. Norton asked if there are any topics that are off the table. And basically, no, I don't. We can talk about anything. The only rule I have around here is that we do it respectfully. I don't want any bigotry. I don't want people targeting marginalized groups or anybody for that matter, with personal attacks. We just don't, there's no need for that. If we have a good argument, we can deal with the arguments themselves. We don't need to be attacking people, but I'll talk about anything with people. I admit, up front that I'm really ignorant when it comes to a lot of things, frankly. I'm not the most educated person in the world. Obviously, I don't have a PhD in anything. But I definitely don't follow a lot of politics as an independent centrist. I get very frustrated with the politics here in America. So my views on politics are probably not very well informed. And I admit that up front. So yeah, other than that, like I said, any topic is certainly on the table. Yeah, Scott, I think so. I didn't mean to derail too much there, but no, what you're talking about, I don't think there's an objective goal setting process. I do think that you have objectivity grounded on the front and the back end, and then subjectivity is kind of sandwiched in the middle because we have to. So the objective standard is nature, nature determines by the laws of physics or the laws of evolution what the truth actually is, the objective truth for the world that we live in, as far as I've considered are concerned, because I don't believe in any type of a God or anything like that. So for me, the ultimate grounding comes down to nature itself. Above that, we have the ability to decide, because of our own decision-making processes, what goals we will want to achieve. Once the goal is decided, then we can have an objective standard of what helps us to achieve the goal or is not productive towards achieving the goal. So the objective morals is about actions, right? That's what morality is what we ought to do, right? Action-based. And so the actions are going to be based on whatever goal that we have set. So if the goal is for cooperation, then we ought to not murder people, because that is counterintuitive to the goal that we've decided to strive for. So that's where I get the objective standard from, is once the goal is selected, but there's no objective goal setting. Everybody picks and chooses their own goals. I do think, though, that there's a universal principle of freedom and well-being. Even the person who wants to self-delete needs their freedom and well-being to be able to make that decision for themselves. So that should be across the board. As an agent, as a moral agent, we all have this same standard that we're working with. And because of that, we ought not interfere with each other's freedom and well-being. And so a person can have the goal of self-deletion. They still need their freedom and well-being to make that decision for themselves. So that's completely different than saying murdering somebody, because you're taking away their freedom and well-being, right? But if a person wants to self-delete, they're using their own freedom and well-being to make that decision.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on just about everything you said. I can't think of anything that I would really disagree with on that, because, yeah, goals are subjective and there's an objective way to achieve those goals one way or the other, you know. So that's where I'm at. That's where I see both aspects come into play. There's a subjective point of goal setting, and then the objective measure of how to get there in the best way possible. And I think that a lot of people ground the objective, even the goal setting. Some people turn the goal setting into a moral debate.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll say, well, the fact that a person simply wants what they want is the objective anchor. Whether people disagree on their wants, each person's different, but it's still objective from an outside point of view. So in other words, whether, people exist or not, I have my own thoughts, wants, and those are objective facts. It's just an objective fact that I would like to get over this cold right now. That's just an objective fact. Even though that want really exists in my mind as a subjective thing, but there's also a part of it that's objective too, and a lot of that maybe I've toyed around with this idea that, as a non-dualist perspective or a paraconsistent sort of argument, I could say, well, really, I'm just an identity by extension of nature itself. So if nature is the objective thing, I'm a natural being. I may experience myself as a subject separate from nature, but that may be an illusion, because maybe free will is an illusion. Maybe I'm just expressing the natural drives of nature through its laws and physics and everything else you had described earlier. And so in a way, my subjective wants are really totally objective. So there's so many ways you can look at it and approach the issue. I think it just depends on what we mean by self, what we mean by nature, and things of that nature.
And things of that nature. No, absolutely, brother. No, I'm picking up what you're putting down, and I think that this really is the crux of the argument, is that people are coming at this from so many different angles. So it really depends on where you demarcate your starting point, right? And you can say, well, is the goal setting objective? Well, that creates a whole different argument, because really having studied this from both sides, because I didn't set out to defend objective morality, right? The reason I even started using the name objective ethics, it's long before I ever even considered whether morality was objective or subjective. It had nothing to do with that at all. It was simply the idea, I think it's a fairly common idea, is that when you have two groups of people that are arguing and you're looking for a compromise, we consider that to be like a more objective position, right? It's not about mind dependence or interdependence or whatever. It's literally about just compromise. And we call it objective because you're not picking one over the other. And that's really what objective ethics came about, is I was just trying to get people to understand that, hey, let's start working together more objectively, not really understanding the true definition or nature of what objective morality is, or even objectivity is. It was really about compromise. And then I started studying philosophy and coming across people asking me about, do I think morality is objective? And I said, well, I hadn't ever considered it. And I started looking into it. And so I didn't have a presupposition starting point, right? I didn't presuppose one way or the other. The name was really removed from the argument. It's just kind of a coincidence that it happened to tie into this. And I could make a solid argument for either case, because it really depends on where you're going to start from and what kind of, how you're going to define things. Because you could take it all the way back to existence, like you're talking about, and identity, right? What is the source of everything? Is there anything in nature that's truly objective? You could make that argument, or you could make an argument that everything is truly subjective. I mean, you could start at that point, right? So it really depends on where you want to build your argument from. So the objective moral argument to me starts after the goal has been set. Then we talk about the actions we want to take to achieve the goal, because to me, that's what morality is. It's a normative claim of what we ought to do. And the we there is rational, reasonable human beings. And we see this in court, right? Like, what would, in a self-defense case, they will often say, what would a reasonable, rational person do if they were in your situation? And we judge this behavior of a particular person based on what we assume any reasonable, rational person would do in that same situation, right? That's where we get the ought from. It's not to say, what would any single living organism do in this situation? We qualify that with, they need to have their reasoning ability, their rationality, and their wits about them. And then what would they do in that situation? So it's an action, but it's an action by a group of people that are able to reason. And when we look in philosophy, many of the philosophical models that are built around objective morality, whether it's moral realism or natural law theory or any of these objectivity, we get a lot of claims, or I shouldn't say claims, clarification that it's about reasoning. Reasoning is a huge point. That's what Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they all based it on reasoning. Aquinas, he even bases it to some degree, even though he's got natural law theory, he mentions reasoning. I mentioned Ayn Rand with Dr. Norton. She talks about reasoning. Human beings' ability to reason is what separates them from the other animals. So reasoning and reason is a huge qualifier for the whole moral argument.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And I had done a deep dive into the topic of rationality recently. And one of the things I kind of discovered through researching the topic.
Hold on. I can hear you. I didn't mean to interrupt. Let me top off my coffee while you do this.
Sure.
Okay? So keep talking,
Sure.
and I'll be right back.
Absolutely. One of the things I kind of realized was that we humans were not as rational as we may assume we are. We're good at rationalizing, but we're not really good at making rational decisions all the time. And this is pretty obvious as you start digging into the psychology, the research, and the neuroscience about all of that. That, unfortunately, we're not as rational as we may think we are. And so that kind of gives us pause a little bit to really explore, these ideas, and it's one of those things where, say, a theist would have a grounds to really say that atheism or agnosticism or skepticism is really meaningless at the end of the day. Because if it's true that humans, at the core, are not as rational as they may think they are, or if it could be the case that we're wrong about everything we think we know, then the theist will say, then really the only person we should really trust in is God. But it seems kind of circular because you're using your reason to reason towards God as a source for your reason. And so there's sort of a self-refutation there too, though. But it definitely opens up a good debate about all of that. That, where do we ground reason? Where are we going to ground it? If we are the product of evolution, which is defined as a blind process, a non-mental process, then why should we trust our quote unquote reason? That's at least that's as the argument goes. Now, I don't really believe in that. I believe that, you know, while we may not have access to reality as it truly is, we may not have direct access to the metaphysical or ontological, objective reality. We know what works for us, and we know what promotes survival and how to get what we want in this world. But, when it comes to metaphysical questions, well, there's a point to be made there, I guess. And I guess that's where the theist will come and say, well, we ground our metaphysics on something like a God, because a God is perfectly rational by definition. But my only issue with that is you're defining the God into existence using your rationality, your inference. You know what I mean? So it seems a little self-refuting.
Yeah, there's a lot of, as usual, Scott, you're a really deep thinker. I've always respected that about you, and Sophia as well. You guys always get me thinking much deeper about something that I might just on my own. I appreciate that about you. The rationality, I probably shouldn't marry that to reason, because I think you're absolutely right. There's, once you start talking about rationality, then you're invoking the amygdala, right? The emotional response, the emotional part of the brain, and reason kind of encompasses or presupposes that we're in a healthy mental state, which means it presupposes our emotions are in check, right? So rationality probably shouldn't be married to that. It just presupposes if we're reasoning, that means we are in control of our mental faculties, which would include our emotions at that point. Oh, we got somebody joining the conversation. Oh, looks like Nathaniel's back. Oh, perfect. Very good, brother. Good to see you. So just to touch on what Scott was saying, there's so much to unpack there, and I don't know, maybe I should couch that actually and see, since I have Nathaniel back and he's got his kids, we never know if he's going to have to save the world again real quick. So Nathaniel, why don't you, were you in mid thought when you left? I can't remember now. Scott's got me thinking about rationality and subjective versus objective. And
well, we were talking about biblical interpretation, but no, I mean, I pretty much covered it. And I got some feedback, by the way, for our stream when I popped through all the places where I promoted it, and they said that we weren't fighting enough. So
I have been accused of that actually from skeptics as well. I had one video that I put out. It was really interesting. In fact, it taught me a very valuable lesson to not really watch your subscriptions and stuff like that too closely, because it's such an ebb and flow. But I was just starting the channel and I was just trying to figure out the algorithm and focusing on the numbers. And I had a video out where I had a conversation with a theist, and I think I might have mentioned some politics in that conversation. I can't remember what video it was at this point. It was a little while ago, but I gained like 17 subscribers in a 24-hour period. I gained 17 subscribers, which for a small channel like this is a lot for one video.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same 24-hour period, I lost 12 subscribers. So I ended up being like +5 at the end of it all. But I was watching this number go up and down and up and down. And I was getting messages from people saying, you let that Christian, or I think it might have been, I can't remember who it was, but you let that theist off the hook. You let him off so easy. You didn't push back on this or that or this or that, and you can't, my goal here is to push back respectfully. But when I have a guest on, I'm really trying to allow them to pretty much platform their ideas and let my community do the pushback. I will push back on certain things.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I were pushing, I was pushing back on some things like evolution or science and things of this nature and the
Yeah.
flood. I'm always very honest with everybody. So if you said something that I found to be demonstrably false, I would have to say, well, politely, brother, I'm going to have to disagree, or I'm sorry, sister, but I can't quite go down that road with you. But I'm not here to duke it out with people. You know, that's just not my way.
Yeah. Well, if you wanna have a, I don't know, I would be interested to see how you would handle that person that goes by Messiah Substitute. I'm pretty sure I know who that is. I'm almost positive, and so I tried to get them to come on because that would be very interesting. Because she bothers everybody as far as I can tell. Oh, there she is. Welcome,
Recognize.
my
Hi,
dear
guys.
friend.
Clara, it's so
Oh.
nice to see you, sister. Oh, is that who Messiah Substitute was?
I think so.
Yes.
Have you interacted with her? How's it going? I'm
So,
fascinated.
Nathaniel,
by that.
I had the pleasure of meeting Miss Claire through watching a discussion that you had with her. And I was so
Nice.
fascinated by your guys' interaction. I saw it on your channel. And so I reached out to her and it said, you know, hey, sister, I'm an agnostic. I just found your conversation with Nathaniel to be very interesting. He's a friend of mine. And even though he and I have a lot of disagreements fundamentally, we've always been very respectful and had polite conversations. And I don't know if you'd like to come on my channel sometime. And she responded. She was very gracious. I know she's probably very busy because I see she puts out a lot of content. And she did respond. We're going to be speaking, I believe it's the 22nd of this month, if I remember correctly.
Okay, I definitely want to hear about that. She sends me stuff all the time.
Yes, that's
It's always-
right.
Yeah, Claire, I don't know.
In my
I don't know if I
diary.
want to get into too much of it now because we are going to have a conversation, but you had mentioned the Noahide laws. And I don't think I told you this or yet, but I was talking to Brother Scott, I believe it was, about writing a book about my views on objective morality because my syllogisms just aren't working. And in my work on my book, I came up with what I call the 7 pillars of ethics. And it maps onto the 7 Noahide laws very well, actually, by just sheer coincidence, with the exception of I don't believe in idolatry, and I don't believe in there's like something about I can't remember the Noahide laws. There's idolatry is one of them that I don't agree. I don't have any use for as an agnostic.
Idolatry, blasphemy, murder,
Blasphemy.
theft.
That's what it was.
Sexual
Blasphemy and
immorality.
idolatry. Those two aren't in my 7 pillars of ethics, but not murder and not theft is covered in 2 of my pillars of ethics, which comes down to community trust and community safety. And we'll talk about it, I guess, on the 22nd.
What about the Sabbath? What about the I did want to start a fight somehow, but what about this is actually I want to know what you think about this intellectually in case I have to go, but I feel like between the atheist and the Sharia law, not you, Miss Kopp. No, I love you. I'd love to hear, but I actually do want to hear the Aristotelian opinion on the 3rd commandment, on remember to rest. You know, we put it above murder. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, other than the 1st commandment, right? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I'm just ignorant, but I don't see the commandments as being a hierarchy, so to speak. Like the 10th commandment, I don't think is any more or less relevant than even the 2nd through the 10th commandment. I think the 1st commandment, having no other God above me, I believe is the 1st commandment of the Mosaic top 10 commandments. If I'm remembering correctly, the 1st commandment's thou shalt have no other God before me. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They are. If you interact with American Christians, yeah, they might not bring that up, but they are considered hierarchical.
I didn't realize that. So no, I didn't even realize
importance. Yeah. Well, it's very fascinating.
It seems kind of counterintuitive because all sins are considered equal according to, I believe it was Paul, right? Other than blaspheming the Holy Spirit. But other than that, my understanding is, and I can't quote it, I've forgotten more than I've remembered in my studies of the New Testament, especially when it comes to Paul. But I believe that Paul does say that all sins are considered equal. So
I think now I don't know what you're thinking of, but the one I would think of is, maybe this wasn't Paul, but it's all have fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fallen short, which isn't the same as saying.
No, it's not the same. I do know what you're talking about. No, it's not the same what I'm thinking of. There's also another one that says if you've committed one sin, you've committed all. Are you familiar with that passage? That might be the same. In fact, that
I
might
know,
be.
I know. I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's still. Well, probably A's philosophy has told this to you that.
James, it's James 2:10.
Okay. Do you? I
That's
don't
where you'll
remember the
find
wording.
that.
Well, James is fascinating, but
Yeah, James he says in 2:10, whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it.
right.
I need to do a little
Okay.
housekeeping really quick, guys. I'm so sorry to have to do this, and I'm really upset that I have to do this at all, to be honest with you. But as the owner of this channel, I do have a certain responsibility to the community. On Tangelo, I was going to have you on stage, but I cannot do that at this point. The reason being, I'm not opposed to hearing your views and having a discussion with you, but people have reached out to me and said that you have some beef with somebody else, and I'm not going to give out any details. I don't want to even talk about this publicly, but my understanding is that you've got to sort that out before I can let you up here. And I need some kind of evidence that you've dealt with that, because I can't platform people who are going to be behaving in that. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to get into details, but unfortunately, I've just got to have some kind of rules about that. And I apologize, because I really don't know all the details. I'm only hearing one side of that story. You're welcome to reach out to me on email privately and tell me what's going on. Give me your version of it. But it just, you need to sort that out before I can have you on here. Sorry about that, guys. Go ahead with what you're doing.
So do you have an opinion on the Sabbath?
As far as rest
from a moral
goes,
perspective.
Yeah, no. So no, I do not. I don't think that. I think that being willing to work for what you want is extremely important, and I think that the virtue would be something between overworking and underworking. So you could correlate the Sabbath to that. I think it's important that we have to have a certain amount of due rest, because if you work yourself to death, you're not paying attention to your family. You're not paying attention to other obligations that you have in your life, and it's easy for us to get caught up in our work. I totally understand that. And I've been a workaholic myself, especially when I owned my own businesses. I've been really guilty of this. In fact, that's actually why I sold the boat building business, was because I was starting to have nervous breakdowns, because I was so wrapped up in it. Being involved in an industry that's as heavily regulated as the maritime industry is, it's very much like auto manufacturing. And when you have in your automobile, you have what's called a VIN number, a vehicle identification number. And as a licensed boat manufacturer, my products had an HIN. It's called a HIN or HIN number, a hull identification number. There's so much legality, so much regulation on top of manufacturing the product. I had to build my own tooling to be able to build my boats, because I was doing something innovative. I mean, just so much involved with it before I even got into selling this stuff, just building it and licensing and regulating it. So it was getting to be where I was working like over 100 hours a week. I was not sleeping well. I was just not taking care of my wife, and so, yeah, working too much. Wouldn't call it a sin, but I would say it's unvirtuous, because you're abandoning other things that need to have priority in your life.
That's interesting.
There's a Christian perspective about the Sabbath too, though, as a foreshadowing of Christ. This worth at least mentioning, whether one accepts it or not. I mean, how the Sabbath kind of connects to the idea of ultimate rest, salvation, and restoration.
Yeah.
And that was fulfilled through the life and death of Jesus Christ. And through him, we have eternal rest from, the situation that was raised in the garden. And, and then, you look at, I think some denominations, I used to be a Jehovah's Witness. So there used to be a story, in Revelation where I guess.
But do you make anything of it from a philosophical standpoint? Because I got to get going soon.
Okay.
But I just always wonder. So you're giving the Christian perspective, and I'm down. But you're not a Christian, and you're big into philosophy. Is there any philosophical significance to that? Because I know philosophy in the West, the Bible is huge, and so I just always wonder what's being said about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what I like to think of it this way, that there's actually a moral to the Sabbath, so that it kind of promotes human worth, freedom,
Yeah.
and trust in something beyond your production. So it's not all about drive to control, accumulate, and perform, but it's about taking care of yourself and one another, your family, and rest. And, so I can flip it to a more non-dualistic sort of moral is the way I would kind of paint it out to be, in that sense. And I like to think of it that way. That way, it gives everybody dignity. It's not all about trying to control nature and control the world. Sometimes we have to have faith in the universe, so to speak.
Now, I'll go back to the audience and I'll listen to Miss Caw because she'll be fun to listen to.
Yeah,
God bless
and
you all.
normally-
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you came back, Nathaniel.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
I also
Nathan.
want to apologize to Claire because normally what happens is when I bring people onto the channel, what I like to do is let them kind of introduce themselves and plug their own channel, and then we kind of get into the discussion. So Claire, why don't you have the floor to introduce yourself to the audience, plug your channel, and of course I'll get a link to your channel in the description of this video after it posts. I try to remember to do that. Scott, I'll link your channel if I haven't already said that. I apologize. And I'll make sure that people can reach out to you guys if they're interested in doing so. So, Claire, why don't you have the floor?
Thank you. Let me just kind of change my clothes. Sorry, I've been playing around with my my new identity. So hold on. Right. So I think Tangelo has a problem with me, and I have encountered him before through, I think, what's her name, another debate channel, and obviously he has a problem with my rather controversial proposal to be a theocracy, but this is actually related to what we were saying about objective morality. So I'm saying if we believe in God, then we have to logically and necessarily obey his laws. And then we have to decide whether we really believe in God or not. And you were talking about your own seven universal laws, not forbidding idolatry and blasphemy, and I just want people to understand that the Quran does not forbid idolatry or blasphemy. If you ever read it, it comes across as a mild admonition, like, why would you waste your time worshipping idols that can neither harm nor hurt you? You're just wasting your time, so don't do it. Worship, the most powerful God. And the Shahada goes, there is no God worthy of worship but Allah. But that's, the Abrahamic God, the God of Israel. So there is a logic to it. It's like, well, why would you worship a lesser God if you know of the most powerful being, in existence, or conceivable if you are skeptical of the existence of God? So, because the Abrahamic God is supposed to be omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly moral, as well as eternal and supreme. Well, why would you worship any other God? And this seems unanswerable. And I suppose the people who prefer to worship other gods just want a less restrictive God, perhaps, a God that doesn't forbid idolatry and blasphemy, and therefore you have, Hinduism and Buddhism, and I think it's quite interesting that if you look at Buddhism, it claims to be an atheist philosophy, and as such, it seems to be saying justice just happens on its own because of the process of reincarnation, which they cannot prove. And then if you look a bit at the history of Buddhism and Hinduism, you will know that Buddhism is really codified. Hinduism. So it's got, the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and basically it is just an attempt to codify Buddhism by Siddhartha Gautama, who comes from Nepal. And so, but if we think, okay, so who does the Buddha think administers hell? And the answer must be, we will have to go back to Hinduism, and if you ask the Hindus who is Lord of the underworld, it would be Lord Yama, who is kind of like Hades, I guess. So so there is this sort of the unanswered question of, how does reincarnation happen? How do we know it even happens? Because Buddhists don't seem to even attribute anyone who administers reincarnation. Surely an intelligence needs to decide whether we've been good boys and girls, and whether we go to we enjoy a better life or a worse life according to our behavior in this life. So this is unanswered. And I think fundamentally the reason why the Abrahamic God is more powerful is because he is believed to be so powerful, and this lets a policeman inside our minds. So we know, once we understand what the rules are, we will avoid it if we, sincerely believe that God exists, and we will be going, that we all have immortal souls, and we either, enjoy eternal bliss or suffer eternal torment.
Scott, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts about that. So I studied a little bit of Buddhism. I used to know a Buddhist high priest for a few years, and we talked about such things. And what I've come to realize, and I didn't know this was the case, is that actually Buddhism teaches rebirth, not necessarily reincarnation. Like reincarnation is a Hindu style idea of a permanent self, an Atman, that moves from life to life. But Buddhism teaches anatta, which means there is no permanent self. So the question is, what continues? So in Buddhism, there is no soul, but there is a causal stream of consciousness. So basically, you could look at it like a metaphor that's oftentimes used as a flame. So if one candle lights another, the flame continues, but it's not numerically the same flame. And that's kind of like how Buddhism describes rebirth. There is continuity, but there's no real fixed identity. So what carries over, you may ask? In some renditions, you'll have this idea of karma. So it's not like cosmic rewards, but it's like tendencies, habits, dispositions, unresolved issues in nature. And these conditions continue in humanity as a species. So you can kind of think of it as you today may be the result of yesterday's mind, right? And in the next life, you or a collective is the result of this life's mind stream, sort of like a progression. So there's no soul traveling. There's just a logical link or a causation through the human species. And I guess the reason why the rebirth happens at all is because of tanah, which is craving and ignorance, which is like desire, which leads to attachments and clingings, becoming, and then into birth. So there's kind of like a chain.
Am I correct in thinking you are now a Buddhist when you were formerly a Jehovah's Witness?
No, I'm not. I couldn't qualify myself as a Buddhist necessarily. I just, sort of understand some points on all religions. It's kind of like why I'm careful to say, like a lot of people may misframe Islam just based on misunderstandings. And so you just got to be careful that you're not doing that, when you talk about certain things, because a lot of Christians will start projecting a lot of fears and misunderstandings onto Islam, for example. And it's the same thing with any sort of philosophical system. I get this a lot when I talk about idealism, non-dualism, things like that. It's very common, and it's just everyone has to be a little careful not to misframe things, and try to understand, and then also kind of understand that people are individuals. So even like, say, a Christian who may call themselves a Jehovah Witness or a Mormon or something like that, in actuality, their ideas of gods are all based on their individuality. No single person has a monopoly on the concept. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different experience.
Yeah, but we can't. I mean, we have this idea of orthodoxy, right? And the Pope who has the final word on Catholic doctrine. It don't. We can't just have, I call myself Christian, but I mean, there will be, a kind of creed, right? You're only Muslim if you recite the Shahada. You're only a Jew if you undergo a certain process of conversion, etc., etc. I mean, there is an official process.
Well, I think there's actually a combination of both, which is where you get the division. And in fact, this has been created a lot of divisiveness within each group. So there's different, you have the Sunni, the Shiite, you have Orthodoxy versus modern versus progressive. I mean, depending on what religion you're talking about, right? There's so many different denominations. So I think there's
the Quran warns against sectarianism. So they've already been warned, but they want their they want to do things their own way, and you can see that the Ummah is divided. They can't do much really, because of their divisions. I mean, it's the same with Christians too. I mean, do we even know which denomination won the wars of the Reformation? Does anybody care? I think a lot of people are just happy to say, I'm Christian and I believe in, this whatever. And then somebody says, oh, but that's not correct. And then it'll be, well, who are you to tell me, you're not the Pope, you're not the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so we don't really have an agreed idea. I mean, it's the same with Americans. I mean, you have, I think people even talk about blue church and red church now. So Christianity in America has been divided into, the political parties of America.
Yeah, I find this is why I try really hard to, when I have conversations with both theists and atheists, and when I talk to one about the other group, I try to remind people that these labels are very subjective, right? Because like what Scott was saying, everybody at the end of the day is an individual. And so, just to be an atheist doesn't necessarily mean you deny the existence of God. It might mean you just don't believe in God. There's hard atheism, soft atheism. There's Buddhism, which is considered, as you mentioned, atheistic philosophy. So you're really, to just label somebody with this umbrella term, you're bound to get a misunderstanding along the way. I've been guilty of doing this in the past. And so I've really tried to focus on, when you're talking to an individual, to try and spend time. This is, in fact, we had Dr. Norton in the chat. I don't know if he's still there or not, but I had a really great conversation with him. He was trying to convert me, I should say convince me, from agnosticism, which is my position, to atheism, right? And so we spent an hour and a half having this conversation. We never came to any resolutions because we spent the entire hour and a half defining each term very carefully. And this is a long, involved process. And it does take a lot longer to get through a conversation, right? But I think this is a really important part of communication that we just don't do as a habit. We assume that when I'm using a particular word, God, let's say, everybody understands what I mean by God, but they could have a completely different understanding fundamentally of what we're even talking about. And we end up talking right past each other. So, because of the individuality, it is really important if you're looking to have a productive conversation and talk with people instead of at people, to find out, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by the universe? Or what do you mean by laws or morality or whatever it might be, because I think there is this individuality. I have a Christian who's coming onto my channel next week, A's Philosophy. I mentioned him in the stream earlier. He rejects Paul. He rejects the Gospel of John. He rejects the divinity of Jesus, but he still calls himself a Christian. Very few Christians agree with him. This is a really outlier position. Another example would be, I was doing an interesting, just personal study on heaven and hell, and I attend a men's group with a good friend of mine who's a Christian, and we once a month we'll go have dinner down at the church, and I really enjoy the fellowship with just men. I think it's important for men to do this and for women to do this. We need to work together. The two sexes need to work together, but it's important for us to have time within our own group as well. I could get into the psychology of all that, but at any rate, so at this church, I'm exposed to hundreds of different Christians, and I started talking to them about heaven and hell and what do they think about heaven is, or what do they think hell is. And what was so interesting to me is none of them agree. I haven't found two similar stories yet. Some people think they're going to be up there playing golf. Some people think that it's just, literally, like you'll get everything across the board.
But they couldn't possibly know. So it's almost, pointless arguing about it, but what we can know is, what the scripture says and what the laws of God are agreed to be. And they forbid idolatry if we're talking about the Abrahamic God.
However, it's worthy to note too that, just in, like, for example, with Christianity, we have thousands of different denominations. We have different views. I mean, it's sort of like we
should work out which denomination is politically the most powerful, shouldn't we? I mean, there were the wars of the Reformation.
True, and the way I look at it is there's sort of an idealistic way of saying, well, this is the ideal. This sort of like a math equation to say, well, if you're this denomination, then it equals this. This is what
it means you're the most powerful politically, the most powerful denomination. But otherwise, we know from church history that all these different kinds of Christians have all accused each other of blasphemy and heresy and gone to war with them and killed each other in large numbers. And that's what the wars of the Reformation were all about. And I find it extraordinary that Christians now they don't know who won the war, and they don't care. They don't even care to ask. So if you care about your religion, you might think, well, out of all the varieties of Christianity, surely I should pick the best one. And it's not one of those non-denominational Christianity churches. I mean, do they even exist?
Yeah, and it's good to look at the role that language plays, because language itself guarantees you a variation already, kind of like what Objective was just saying about, ideas like God, soul, spirit, being, universe, all that kind of stuff. People picture different things. And
but you can, just by clarifying the situation, I mean, a lot of atheists say, oh, which God do you mean? And I'm saying, of course, it's the Abrahamic God. There is no other God worth talking about. Why would you worship, a God less powerful than the Abrahamic God? Because the next person will say, well, my God is more powerful than your God, so I win.
Yeah, that's, to me, that's a very dualistic way of approaching it.
Well, I suppose I'm binary because, I want to, get to a conclusion about what is to be done. I mean, I am a political activist after all, and I'm trying to present things in a way that is clear, and hopefully not controversial, even if people hate what I'm proposing. So if we can agree as people who are not sure if God exists, that the laws of God has, somehow caused our civilization to be better than, if we were, lawless people.
Yeah, I mean,
who don't get our laws from scripture.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people may say, well, it's not just unrealistic. It would actually be kind of suspicious if millions of minds formed identical concepts, that religion operated at the level of, religion does operate at the level of symbols, metaphors, analogies, lived experiences. And those also
but people
they're always
believe.
going to refract through individual minds.
Yeah, but why do people want to believe in God? I mean, it's not, we don't know if God exists,
Oh
but
yeah.
people want to believe in God because they're afraid. They're
Oh
afraid to
yeah.
die. They're afraid to be a victim of injustice. And most of the time, they don't know what to do. And
Absolutely.
religion, with its safety rails, helps people think they're, right and good and
Yep.
safe.
That's dualism. That's the idea that, you've got these distinctions, and these distinctions occur to people to say that they're right, that my belief just happens to be conveniently enough the right God. I'm of the right religion. I'm of the right race. I'm of the right culture. And how convenient, but when you look at the big picture, there's so much division because it's based on division. It's based on, specialness, and this idea that, that one group in groups out groups. And so, and
Yeah,
and
but
for
we
me,
do need in groups and out groups because we're not going to be saying everybody's welcome to our club. Maybe you don't like them, maybe they're criminal, maybe they won't pay their membership fees or something.
well, there's different ways to approach it.
Well, how do
There's-
you propose we approach it? We can't just let anybody in.
I think
I'm
it
not
depends.
sure.
Sorry, I guess that was directed at you, Scott. Go ahead, and I'll answer after that.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure why compassion would not apply. Like,
Well, I'm not being uncompassionate. Have I said let's be cruel to people? But I'm just having these these categories so people can understand who is obeying the law and who is breaking the law. Or are you going to say, well, laws don't matter, let's just do whatever we want?
right. Well, that's not the premise of the non-dualistic view that I'm proposing.
Well,
Is
I'm not sure
basically
what
just
you're
to say,
proposing.
well, it's to say that, if we can sort of look at each other as connected, then we can approach problems like crime, problems like that you mentioned, in a
Well,
more
we already have
compassionate.
all these laws, but we don't think they're being properly enforced or fairly enforced.
Yeah, you
So
have
so
to
this
enforce laws, absolutely.
so
And
so it means that the enforcers are corrupt or the government is corrupt. And if we complain about our government, then well, somebody might say people deserve the government they get because the people themselves are corrupt.
yeah, and part of addressing that is to ask, why is there corruption? What is the
Because we
root of
have the
corruption?
evil inclination. We like having things our own way. We think we're going to get away with stuff if we cheat. And if nothing bad happens when we do bad stuff, will just carry on doing bad stuff.
Well,
Um,
I don't know that that's a universal principle that everybody holds. I actually reject that at face value. I know a lot of people do think that human beings are prone to what we might even paraphrase as evil for the sake of this conversation, selfishness, whatever. But I don't think that's necessarily true because that flies in the face of cooperation. And without cooperation, our species wouldn't be here today. We're 300,000 years in the making and counting. So we need to cooperate. I think in general, what you see in social media, what you see on the news is really a small microcosm of what's actually happening out on the streets. I think what happens is a lot of people are too distracted with daily life to really get involved and be activists in making positive changes. But at the end of the day, most people will help. Excuse me. I'm also getting over a cold.
I'm not proposing that we don't cooperate with each other.
No, I don't think that you are. But I don't think that, and I'm not accusing you of that. So forgive me if I give you that impression, because no, I don't think you are implying that at all. I think that having laws actually promotes cooperation because it gives us something that's quote unquote objective, right? And outside, the law doesn't change, so the people have to conform to whatever the law is. But the people do write the law at the end of the day, so we have to base what are we basing these laws on. So, which is why I believe there needs to be an objective morality based on nature, based on cooperation. Now, people can institute a religious construct into that, but I think that historically this has been divisive. It's been problematic. And I think Scott was kind of alluding to that. And I do agree in that regard that the division, there's different ways of looking at division. If we say the law creates an in-group and the out-group is people who don't want to follow the law, who don't want to cooperate, then yeah, absolutely, there's going to be an in-group and an out-group. But if the law is based on you have to believe the Earth is 6,000 years old and the evolution is a myth.
No, I'm not proposing that at all.
No, I don't think you are. No, sister, I don't think you are. I'm as a hypothetical. What we do actually see happening in history as division, some of the divisions, or Islam versus Christianity, Catholicism versus Protestantism, so on and so forth. We've seen this very bloody battle over whose religion and whose law is going to be enforced. And we see it even to this day to a lesser degree. I think we are moving towards an improvement, towards better cooperation globally. I actually think the world is getting better. We are seeing less wars. People think that, yeah, there are a lot of wars still happening. It's unfortunate. But if you really study history and go back, a few thousand years, it was bloody. And you go back even further than that, it was very violent everywhere. So we don't see that as much on this global scale. So I think we are improving science, technology, philosophy of religion. I think all of these things are making headway. We still have a long way to go, though. So I think that there can be an in-group, out-group when you have an established law. But the key is, what are we establishing this law on? What is it really? What is the fundamental principle? And I think that cooperation among all people to follow a basic set of principles that I mentioned the book that I'm sort of working on here. So let me just give you these 7 pillars of ethics, and we'll talk about this, I think, in our conversation. But one of them would be public safety. So this would cover everything like murder or whatever else you might think, crashing a car into somebody, uninsured, not being able to pay your bills to that person. Public trust, theft would be included in something like that, right? Familiar relations, that you have a responsibility to take and provide for your family. Personal autonomy. Consequences for unlawful behavior, which is where the codification of law would come into play. Environmental harmony, so being kind to animals and being environmentally responsible. And then virtue is the 7th pillar. And the virtues I come up with, Aristotelian virtues, the golden mean I talk about quite often. So that's my 7 pillars of ethics. And I think if we built the law based on that kind of a construct, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant, like, oh, I've got all this figured out, but I think it could be really that simple. And much of what we see historically in the various religions do have this common thread. And a lot of religions will say that that's because the God that they believe in has kind of written the law. Like Christians say that God wrote the law on men's hearts, right? So if we do see this commonality, every religion talks about not murdering, not stealing, so on and so forth. There are some other differences, such as blaspheming or, the Sabbath day, or they have their own unique elements, but there's this common thread that's based on what I would consider to be natural law that fosters cooperation. And if our laws are based on that structure, we could have a global harmonization to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, if we all, people talk about the global order, and if we all agreed on the rules-based order and were confident that, they would be kept, then there would be no wars. But I suppose the problem is, somebody saying you broke that law, and the global hegemon says, well, I can get away with it because I have nukes and you don't. I have the biggest navy and army in the world and you don't, and so shut up.
this is a violation of one of the key pillar on the 7 pillars of ethics is that virtue. So that one of the virtues is fairness, which means we treat like cases alike. And that's where we have to build our fundamental understanding of objective morality, is that we judge everything equally, like cases alike. So the idea that somebody can break the law because they're stronger violates that one of those key pillars of ethics. It can happen, and it does happen historically. But if it didn't happen, if we mapped it out like this, or something similar to this, then we would have a fundamental thing that is objectively fair to everybody. And if it's fair, it's just. And if that means it can be justified. If you're unjust, you can't justify your actions epistemically. You can do them because you've got nuclear bombs or a big chainsaw or a flamethrower or whatever the fuck you've got, but you can't justify it logically and reasonably to be consistent if you lack fairness and if you lack justice. It becomes self-refuting.
Yes, so in the Peloponnesian War, Thucydides recorded that said to the Delians that the strong do what they will and the weak suffer as they must. And the ancient Athenians are now extinct. So, but the idea of the Thucydides trap is that it's a trap that every declining empire falls into, because it thinks that there's a rising empire, coming up behind me. If I nuke them first, then they won't catch up.
The kind of the way that, to go back, is I kind of approached the at least to describe the problem, maybe not to really solve it, because that may be a bit unrealistic, but the root problem to me seems to be a kind of mistaken identity. So like with non-dualism, of course, it says the separate ego self is kind of like a misperception. So that selfishness, things that you were mentioning, it's basically saying I am this isolated entity that must secure, defend, and expand itself at any cost. And that, illusion, of course, is going to lead to what we see: greed, fear, violence, domination of the other. Crime is seen as, the same way, harming yourself, things of that nature, so, compassion, you could say, would naturally follow a realization of what, when that ego boundary would soften. So in that case, empathy would increase, defensiveness, competition would loosen a little bit. And from that sort of ethic, it would make society a lot better. I'm not saying everybody would necessarily go for it, because some people just can't. We're kind of a victim of our language. Our language is a reflection of our perceptions. And so we have in our language a dualism in our language.
Well,
But,
I mean,
but I don't think that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please, finish. Okay, I mean, yes. Please,
Yeah. So,
complete your point.
I was just going to say, it's a good starting point. It's a good way to approach the problem. Just kind of understand what the problem is, kind of define it for me.
Yes,
And,
people thinking they can get away with shit, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and that's why you have rules. So at least in your group who keeps the laws and who breaks them. So laws are made to be broken, rules are made to be broken. So that's how you can tell if somebody has a habit of telling the truth or is a compulsive liar. And then if they're a compulsive liar who believe in nonsense, who can't be reasoned with, then you know not to make them your leader.
Yeah.
And I think there's another element I'd like to just clarify, because of the language, I don't want people to misunderstand my position here. There are some things I think should be globalized, so to speak, and it has to do with equality and respect and this common moral virtue that I always talk about. Having self-respect comes from being able to respect other people, and this allows us to live a good life. But I don't think that we should all have the same necessarily political structure, the same religious beliefs, the same culture. I don't think that we need to be one, just one organization, so to speak, as far as that goes. I think diversity is important because, as I've said before, the only way that we can really know if we're on the right track is when people push back on our ideas, because what happens is when everybody starts agreeing with each other, we stop thinking critically. And it also becomes very problematic because we discourage, through human nature, people feel discouraged to start questioning the group. If you're in the in group and everybody's in agreement, Schopenhauer talked about this. I said Chopin, sorry. Schopenhauer talked about this. He said that when you're part of an in group, you are afraid to question the group. And it's not because you are afraid that your ideas are going to be shot down. It's because the very act of questioning the majority becomes frightening for the individual. So you end up getting basically, scared to just continue to agree with something, even if you don't necessarily think it's right, because of what we call peer pressure. So we need groups pushing back on each other. We need different ideas to be exposed. And I want to make
I hope you don't
clear
think
about
that I want to, make everyone think alike. I'm just saying, even with the best will in the world, you won't be able to do that. And therefore, what I'm talking about is a minimum standard of morality, such as the no height laws. And if you don't like the idolatry and blasphemy bit, but I'm saying that Sharia actually doesn't forbid it. Because Islam is an imperial religion, and all imperial, all empires basically don't care what you believe in as long as you pay your taxes and pay your tribute. So that's why empires are multiracial and multicultural, and full of people with different religions and races.
Mhm.
So but obviously it still has an umbrella of rules and beliefs, which are believed to be the imperial order, whatever it is.
All right, I'm in the chat. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Whoever's in power, everybody is a hero in their own story, and so every power wants. That's the function of the power, is to maintain its power and to lord it over its subjects to some extent or another. And maybe with the advent of super AGI, this super AI stuff, maybe we'll all get the benefit of joining the Borg, where we can all be in unison and unity, and we all have to think one way, and there'll be no more troubles. All our troubles will be over. But there's a lot of skeptics out there to say that maybe this would be not very good for humanity, because by our nature, we are pluralistic. We like our individuation and things of that
but I
nature.
mean, you should still have a dominant culture, an official moral system, or people will, society will just fragment, wouldn't it? I mean, it's like
Yeah, I
what you're
agree.
supposed to do.
If I could run the world if I was the ruler of the world, I would say that everyone should be a non-dualist, because that would treat selfishness and crime as an expression of ignorance of unity, and responds not by denying responsibility, but I would be emphasizing compassion, consequences, and awakening rather than just condemnation, and more compassionate. But that would be my dream, to approach it that way. But all sort of power structures may start off with the best intentions, don't they?
Mhm. Yes, Tilting Windmill asks, people don't know squat about the God they seem to believe in, but then I ask Tilting Windmill how he or she thinks that she knows better than the people he or she claims to not know as well. Did that make sense? Probably it didn't. But I
What
mean,
did she say?
why does Tilting Windmill think they
Oh, so she
know
says,
better?
Jacqueline, people
I have
don't
to go
know.
back. Let me see which. So Tilting Windmill is a dear friend, and probably I will say the greatest mod on YouTube that I've seen. Very, very intelligent, very fair. I've seen so many mods that are just way too emotional, way too immature. I've even been kicked off of 2 platforms. I think one was an atheist channel because I told them that their definition of agnosticism was not based on anything I've ever heard before, and they got mad and kicked me off, which I thought was a very strange reason to get kicked off of an atheist channel for. And the other one was a Christian channel when I told them that I rejected their justification for the contradiction of the 2 creation accounts in Genesis 1. There's 2 creation accounts, they contradict each other. I've heard the apologetics for it, and I wasn't being mean about it. I just said, well, these just don't match up. You've got different events happening on different days, and they told me to go read all these apologetic websites. I says I'm not interested in subjecting myself to that misery. I'm well familiar with this, and then they kicked me off of that channel. So you can get kicked off for silly reasons. Tilting Mod is a very fair Tilting Windmill. Excuse me. I'm getting so confused. Tilting Windmill is a very fair mod. He really does try to give people an opportunity. He explains what the rules are. He's very patient. And so, yeah, I really appreciate him being willing to help out with this channel because, as everybody probably notices, I'm not good at following the conversation and the chat. I'm really bad at it. I have no clue what's going on. Either I have to focus on one or the other. I'm just too old. My brain is too addled from previous drug abuse and other issues that I did to myself when I was younger. So whatever the excuse is, I'm not good at this. Some people can regulate everything themselves. I'm very impressed with that. I don't know, Claire, if you have mods on your channel or not. Scott, I don't think you guys do mods.
I actually have a few.
You do have some, yeah, and you can.
Well, but they're actually not meant to use their range. So, I mean, I tend to let them go wild, and you know, if it's something really terrible, I'll delete it later. But on the other hand, you know, on the whole, I just let them have fun, and you know, insult each other if they want. But they, you know, they're quite well behaved, I would say, and maybe part of the chat is, you know, to commune with each other. What the stream is going on, and not even listen to, you know, what's being said. I mean, that can be a bit annoying, I suppose. You're talking away, and then you notice your chat is not, you know, saying anything that's related to what you've been saying.
Oh, I think he's. So I'm trying to go back to the comments here. So I'm saying that people don't know about stuff in the Bible. That I would agree with, actually. The majority of people that I talk to, and I mean no disrespect to any individual person, especially like Claire, both Claire and Scott, actually, you're both very well read. You guys definitely, when you talk about stuff, you talk about stuff that you've looked into and studied. And I really do respect that, because a lot of people make apologetic arguments for things that they just simply are not informed about. And a lot of it comes from the fact that they've been taught something at church, and this isn't just religious people. People do this politically all the time. They start parroting talking points that they haven't done the research. And when somebody brings up a counterexample, they just deny it whole cloth because it goes against the narrative that they've been taught. But I find this, I think what Tilting Windmill might be referring to here, and I haven't seen the whole chat, so I might be off base here, but I'm assuming what he's talking about is that so many people will make apologetics, particularly like the Christians, for example, will say there's no slavery in the Bible. There's no chattel slavery in the Bible. And of course there is. There's no genocide in the Bible. And of course there is. They get it. If anything breaks the narrative, they deny it without really having done the research. And the church has really been a disservice to the people that attend church, because the church, each church has its own agenda. So they will start to kind of couch things in a particular way without being willing to just look at everything objectively and say, okay, this is what everything is saying, and this is the reason that we believe what we believe. Instead, they really control the narrative. It's like they don't want people to see certain things. One example of this would be in the Bible, I believe the earliest mention of the Messiah is in Isaiah. I think it's around chapter 41, 44 maybe. It talks about Cyrus the Great being the Lord's Messiah. If you look at the glossary of almost every single Bible, at the end, it'll say where you can find the index, right? Where the word Messiah comes up, and it will always refer you to mentions of Jesus. You won't find very many glossaries unless you actually go to like a concordance, right? You won't find many glossaries that will say, actually, yeah, you can find the word Messiah in Isaiah chapter 44, verse 5 or verse 1 or whatever it is, because they don't want people getting confused about Cyrus the Great being the Messiah. Well, wait a minute, why is Messiah here and then Jesus is the Messiah? So they control the narrative. That's just one example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
see that a
I
lot.
guess you can kind of tell if somebody's, you know, educated and reasonable, you know, in you know that they'll you know say they'll look it up and come back to you, you know, rather than accuse you of something and or you know or
And some
insult
of it
you.
is like a bias that people have at root. Like, I know, like when I was a Christian, when I was really a hardcore Jehovah Witness, I just knew that I had the truth. So even if somebody came to me with some kind of clear contradiction to my belief system or some kind of problem, I just assumed, it sounds good, but obviously this is wrong. This has got to be wrong. So I'm just going to stick to saying it's wrong. It's kind of like how some people, would argue against flat earth people, with that kind of confidence. It's like, I know the world's not flat. So even though this flat earther is bringing a lot of stuff I never heard before, I'm just going to go ahead and dismiss it because we all know the world is round. So why even entertain it? And so they have that sort of cavalier confidence in their belief systems. And they don't really take it seriously when they hear something to contradict their belief, even if the argument is strong and they really have no comeback. They'll just say, well, I just know that I know that I know it's wrong. Like, I can't tell you
I
why I
just
know it's wrong. I
feel
just know it is. I
that
just
it
feel
must
it's
be
wrong.
true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what Tilting is saying here, I actually, and again, this is going to be anecdotal, so maybe it's just Tilting and I happen to share the same experiences and it's different for other people. But what I have found, and I have studied, I'm not a biblical scholar, all right? I like to try and make sure people understand that, but I have studied this in college formally, and I have studied this for many years. And so I have a above average understanding of what's in the Bible. And I've had many conversations over the last several decades with theists, in particular, being in America with a lot of Christians. And what I have found is that atheists and agnostics tend to know more about what's in the Bible than the people who claim to believe it's true. This has been my experience across the board almost. And there are some really well-informed believers. That's not to say there aren't some really smart people who do know their scriptures really well. And there's a lot of Christians who can quote verses right off the top of their head, boom, boom, boom. And so there certainly are people that can do that. But the average, we might even consider them cultural Christian, will make a claim, and then a skeptic like an atheist or an agnostic will say, well, that's not even in the Bible, or this refutes that, or this is a contradiction. The believer will have no clue what they're even talking about. They won't even believe it's in the Bible. And it shocks me when I watch some of the skeptic scholars who used to actually like have master's degree in biblical studies, like Justin from Deconstruction Zone's a great example. He will point out things that are in the Bible, and Christians, Muslims and Jews actually will call his channel and try to argue with him about what's actually in the Bible. And then he pulls up these verses at time and time again. And they have no clue that that was actually in the Bible. And then they have to start scrambling for justification or apologetics for something that they were just completely unaware of. And I think that is very common. I think Tilting Windmill is right about that. And I'm not trying to be mean to people. I hope people understand. I'm not trying to be mean to anybody by saying that, but if you're going to make a claim about something, especially when you start talking about morality and how people ought to live their life, you're going to be judging people on that level. You should really do your due diligence, in my opinion.
Yeah. And some people will, what I find is, and I get this a lot when I start debating about topics like consciousness, like these real deep sort of philosophical sort of things. A lot of these people are not really invested in the topic. They don't really know. They just know enough to know that they can probably debunk most people that talk about, different views or whatever. And so they won't really put in the work, to really engage you specifically. It's kind of like with your argument, objective ethics. It's kind of like you're coming at morality from a very nuanced position. You've put a lot of work into it. You've appealed to a lot of scholarly background philosophers that I've read too, that I understand exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of the folks that engage you, they just know enough to deal with people like theists or people that have very sort of shallow arguments for
Mm.
objective morality that are easily destroyed easily. And so they kind of put you in that box. And but when you come with these different things, they'll just that's just word salad. Oh, that's just you're thinking too. It's not that deep, man. You know, it's like very dismissive, and I'd be surprised if they would even engage you at all with your real argument
Yeah,
because
it's
they're not
really
that interested, to be honest with you. They're not really interested. That's the
Yeah, no,
problem.
brother, you're absolutely right. It does happen all the time, and it's really telling if you go look at the video that I had put out. Because now, granted, I do admit that my syllogisms are broken and need work. I've been very open and honest about that. I try to be a very open and honest person about anything, even critical of myself, because it forces me to improve and to do a better job. But my argument itself, as I laid it out, has not been refuted, and it hasn't even really been addressed. And I don't know if we're at 100 comments yet on that video. We're at a lot of comments, and people have literally just either completely ignored the argument or didn't even watch the video, just going off the title itself. And nobody's really engaged. There's been only one or two people who've really actually said, okay, what is it you're talking about? How are you getting this actual objective standard? Almost everybody, there's even people in there trying to talk to me about being a theist and divine command theory, which obviously shows they haven't watched the video, because not only am I not a theist, but I've addressed divine command theory in the video itself. So you can tell that people aren't really engaging with the argument. And I understand that it is a very complex position that I'm taking. I'm kind of combining different philosophical models. And that does, make it a little bit more to digest. But you're absolutely right about
Maybe
that.
each syllogism needs a stream of its own.
I think I need to I probably need to scrap the syllogism attempt. I think that Deconverted Man and others have advised me that to come up with a syllogism for this, you're probably not going to get a sound syllogism, no matter how good the argument is. When it comes to something like this, and Scott had actually referred to this earlier in our discussion. I don't know if you were here for that, but when it comes to certain things, creating a syllogism is not necessarily even really possible. And another person said that even if you were to create a sound syllogism, it's only going to be relative to people who understand formal and informal logic. Nobody else is even going to follow it anyway. So it's kind of a lot of work for naught, maybe. I think that the best way to do it is to present it in an essay form. I think my video is about as strong as I can and clear as I know how to present it at this point. People either have to engage it and then we could discuss it, or they're going to just be talking past me at that point.
Well,
Yes,
I think maybe an aphorism is better, which is just a single sentence, which is, the most that most people can, absorb and
Right. That is one problem that the psychology of people. I don't think that people are inherently quote unquote evil or prone to super selfishness or whatever it might be. I think people are generally good and cooperative because we need to be to survive. We recognize that at a very early age. We need our parents, right? First and foremost. Even I've had people talk to me about, well, what happens about a hermit who wants to live out in the woods by himself? It's like, yeah, but he had a mother at the very least. Just a guaranteed fact that he had a mother. I don't even have to know this person to know that's a demonstrable fact. So we need some type of cooperation at some point. But I think one of the psychological problems that people have is, one, our need to ascribe agency to things, which is where a lot of God beliefs come into play. And fear, as you mentioned, Claire, I think that's a huge one as well, fear factor. And the other thing is our attention span. People have a very short attention span. There's a lot of studies that have been done in this in advertising. People who make a lot of money creating and selling advertising space have done a lot of effort into recognizing how short people's attention spans are and what really grabs people's attentions, breaking down demographics. So there's a whole study to that and a whole psychology to it.
Well, there's another problem you have too, especially in this space of philosophy, and we're both kind of in the same space, objective ethics. We do this YouTube channel, and we're both in this space of intellectualism and philosophy and things like that. That's what these topics are really about, right? So the other problem you're going to have that I've noticed is we deal with very intelligent people. And the problem is that while rationalizing doesn't necessarily equal reasoning, really smart people are good at trying to justify what they already want to believe. Smart people are really good at finding supporting evidence, spotting
So true.
weaknesses in your views, building complex explanations to, write you off. Those skills work whether truth is the goal or not. That's the problem. So intelligence is
Mm.
kind of like a real powerful engine, but it really depends on who's driving, whether they want to you know, see your point or not. If they don't want to see it, if they're very smart people, they're going to be very creative and throw you for a loop and really just kind of give off the perception that they've debunked you because they're just
Yeah.
that smart.
Yeah, and that's why, being of good character is so important.
Yeah.
If you want to engage with anyone, I mean, there's no point, talking to a very intelligent person who's a compulsive liar.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And
But
we
then
see
you might
that so
accuse
much.
me of, this in-group, out-group thing. But I'm saying, the minimum of decency, of moral decency is somebody who isn't a compulsive liar and who tries to keep his promises.
I know people that are so intelligent, they have argumentative skill. Like these people, they have theory of reasoning that would give off the perception that everything they say has got to be true. And I mean, it's sort of like it boosts their debate skill, their fluency with their language, their counter argument ability. They're very fast to kind of roll it off their tongue.
Yeah, but
And
I
so
think they could easily be defeated if you say, well, can you explain this word to me or this idea that you seem to think is, undisputed truth, and once you do that, a lot of their arguments are break down.
yeah, yeah. What I've kind of working on is with folks like that is just having key questions, asking more questions, because that's the only way you're going to kind of cut through all of the bullshit, so to speak, because
Mm.
they're going to give you all this counter and all this counter argument sophistication that can be very misleading and really confuse you. They'll leave you cross-eyed if you let them, and they'll steamroll you with that stuff. But the
Yeah,
only way to kind of stop that train from rolling you over, you've got to ask the right key questions that will trap them in their problem. They've got some kind of problem. You just got to put your finger on it. And the way
yeah.
you do it is through really well thought out questions.
Yes, and the thing is, a lot of people don't even know why the person they said won the argument. Won the argument. If you ask them, like, okay, you think the other person won? Why do you think they won? What was their killer argument? That completely defeated mine. They won't be able to tell you. It's like, well, I hate what you say. The other person, said, this thing against you that is better than what I could have done myself. Therefore, he won. I mean,
Yeah,
they can't even explain it.
no, I see that so much, Claire, when I watch debates online and you're in the chat and you're like, oh, my guy smoked the other guy, and I'm watching this thing and I'll come in with an objective out, kind of a nonpartisan view just to try and get the information without a preconceived idea of which side I'm on. And I try to be very balanced in a lot of these things. Obviously not everything in my life. Like if it's going to be about evolution, I presuppose evolution is true based on the overwhelming scientific evidence. But so I'm not perfect, like non-biased. We all have certain biases, but I am able to separate my biases in a lot of situations, especially when it comes to philosophy. And I'll be watching a debate about something, and I'm watching the chat, and it depends on if the chat is on. Let's say, just hypothetically speaking, the chat will be about creationism versus naturalism, and it'll be hosted on a Christian website, on a young earth creationist website in particular, right? And 80% of the people are already in line with the young earth model, the Christian creationist model, and so they're already talking about how their person has won the debate in the opening arguments. We haven't even gotten into the cross examine or anything else. Then the voting poll comes up, and of course the person whose channel is considered the winner, and he will have the worst arguments. The actual debater will have the worst arguments that have been debunked so many times by actual scholars and scientists who actually know what they're talking about. And yet everybody in the chat is fully convinced that their guy won the debate. I see it happen all the time.
Kent Hovind comes to mind.
Oh my God, exactly. It's a perfect
it's
example.
like, you know what? I will never debate. And I was challenged by Kent Hovind to debate him on that. But I already told him I would probably lose by a landslide. But he was like, yeah, well, I'm glad you recognize that. And I'm like, yeah, but the reason I recognize that isn't because what your point is true. It's just that you have a way of steamrolling people over with all your language, and I can't keep up. So I know that I would probably just be defeated, and I admit that. So I really just backed out of that one, even though I think to my heart of hearts he's wrong.
Oh yeah.
I
What
probably
was the
can't
debate
really
about?
creation
Evolution.
versus
One of the only things he
evolution.
debates is evolution.
Yeah. And like I know, like to myself, I know he's wrong. I can't really tell you why. If I was to get into a debate, I probably couldn't express it correctly because the guy is, he's a teacher. He actually he comes from my hometown here in Pensacola, and he used to give seminars, and the guy's very educated, and he knows his stuff. He's got all the language down. And so, yeah, he's kind of out of my league, but I don't think that he's really that smart at the same time. I just think he's got that gift of gab and that Gish Gallop style that,
That's the Gish Gallop. It's the rhetoric. Now,
What's his name again?
Kent Hovind, Kent with a T, Kent Hovind. And so it's KentHovind, D as in dog.
Okay.
So dogmatic. D as in dogmatic. And at any rate, I do need to start winding this down. I got to help the wife out around the house, and I need to get some food. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you guys each a final word before I make a closing statement. And Scott, you joined first. Why don't I give you the first final word, and Clara, I'll let you go after that, and then I'll give a final closing statement. Scott, why don't you go ahead and talk about your channel or projects you're into, or any thoughts you might have on what we've talked about. The floor is going to be yours.
Sure. Thank you, man. I just enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, come on by. I'm looking to grow my community. My channel is called The Mirror Point. You can find me on here on the YouTubes. Check me out. Subscribe, like my videos. Join, which is very interactive. So I look for pushback, people that disagree, people that can expand the views and stuff like that. And all you guys are welcome, and I just appreciate having this conversation today.
Okay, that was great. Scott, great to see you, brother. If you want to show yourself out, and then I will have Claire. The floor is yours. You want to introduce your channel, and I'll make sure to get links up in the description so people can find you, and mention that we're going to be having a conversation coming up. But anything you want to talk about at all, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have a link tree which gives you links to, all my Substack and other stuff. I am a political activist promoting a legal system called secular Quranism, which is based on the Quran, but I'm not Muslim. I'm only agnostic, and I promote it because I think if it was just me saying, you guys should be doing this, that, and the other, you'll all do things in exactly the opposite way. So I'm saying God, if he exists, agrees with me. I'm cool with his rules, and if you will look at his book, you might even agree with me, but sadly most people won't be able to do that. But I still hope that they will read my book as well as the Quran to reassure themselves it's not as horrible as they have been led to believe. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. I'm so glad I met you, sister. And please do, I think we have an email conversation going. So send me the link to your book. I didn't know you had written a book, or maybe we'll talk about that when you're a guest on my show, and we'll get it linked in that discussion. So I'll reach out to you there. excuse me. So as I mentioned, Claire is actually going to be a featured guest, not next week, but the following week. I believe that's the 22nd. I hope I got my dates right here. I've got so much going on. Excuse me. So basically, okay. Well, there was a lot of topics discussed. While I'm talking about the upcoming schedule, next week's guest is going to be A's Philosophy coming back. We are going to be discussing, informally debating free will. As many of you know who follow my channel, I do not believe in libertarian free will. I think it's self-refuting. I think it's been demonstrably refuted by science, neuroscience, and psychology. But A's seems to be committed to that position. So we're going to have a friendly discussion about that, a back and forth about free will. Libertarian free will, to me, just doesn't make any sense. But we're going to get into that next week. I'm really looking forward to having that discussion with him. There's going to be a couple of people who have reached out to me to host and moderate a debate. I've never done this before, but I know everybody involved, and so it makes sense to have me be involved, as I'm impartial because I know all the parties. One of the debates that's on the table, the gentleman I mentioned, A's Philosophy, he wants to debate with the young man, Nathaniel, who was just on my guest on the channel earlier. For those of you who didn't catch that, Nathaniel's a Orthodox Catholic, Roman Catholic, and A's Philosophy is an unorthodox Christian, and they're going to be debating on whether or not Paul contradicts Jesus. That should be a pretty good debate. Both of these gentlemen are pretty well studied in the Bible, unlike a lot of theists, like Tilting Windmills pointing out. A lot of people don't even know the Bible, and they claim to believe it's true. These two gentlemen are not like that. They both are very well studied in the Bible. That should be a pretty good debate. A Muslim friend of mine, he reached out to me to see if I would be able to find any Christians who wanted to debate the divinity of Jesus. Nathaniel wants to step up to do that as well. That'll be an interesting debate. So I think I'll probably will be hosting that at some point in the future as well. So stay tuned for that stuff. I think that's all the housekeeping. I am going to just mention, and closing too, there was somebody I brought up. It's unfortunate that, and it's my mistake, I let them onto the stage without paying attention to who it was, because I would have liked to address that completely anonymously. But unfortunately, the cat's out of the bag, and that's my fault. I didn't mean to embarrass anybody personally, even though I don't agree with what you did. In fact, I'm pretty disappointed to have heard about it. And I'm not going to give out names at this point. If people go back, they'll see who I'm talking about. But basically, you know who you are. I let you on the stage for just a brief moment until I realized what was going on. The last time I had you on the channel, several people reached out to me to say that you had really hurt somebody's feelings. And I'm not going to get into the details of that because I'm not trying to publicly shame anybody. Okay. But I have to assume, because so many people reached out to me, that what they're telling me is true. I need you before I can let you back on my stage, because I don't have a personal problem with you. I have a problem with this behavior. Okay, and I'm assuming it's true. You can reach out to me privately on email and give me your side of the story, but it's going to be your version against a dozen people that reached out to me. Okay, so what I really need to do before I can platform you, and because I'm happy to have theists, Christians come on here and give their viewpoints. I might push back a little bit, but I'm open to letting people have their own views discussed openly, whether it's political, religious, social, whatever. That's the whole point of this channel, to bring people together who disagree. But the one rule I have here is that we're going to be respectful to each other. And the action that you did, from what I heard, is unacceptable. It cannot be tolerated, and I cannot platform somebody who engages in that kind of behavior. You've got to show me proof that you've reached out to that person that you've hurt, and that you've made a sincere attempt to rectify that situation. And I can't tell you what that involves, because that's between the two of you. After you can show me somehow that you've done that, then I'm happy to move forward. Even if other people don't like you, I believe in fairness and I believe in forgiveness. If you've made the sincere attempt to rectify that situation, I'm willing to let you come and speak. Okay. And I hope that other people will understand that. Other people don't control this channel to that degree. The reason that I'm going with what they're saying is because I don't support the activity, the action that you were engaged in. And I'm not going to support being mean to people, especially in something that's that sensitive of a nature. When it comes to identity, gender identity, this is a very serious topic that we need to be very sensitive about. I believe in equality. I believe everyone's issues are equally important. So marginalized groups don't have more important issues than anybody else. But we know that when it comes to identity, all right, personal identity, this is who a person is. It's the very foundation of their existence. Okay. We need to be respectful of that. Whether you agree with it or not, it's irrelevant. We need to be respectful to each other. Okay. Everybody has a right to their own identity. And that's just a fundamental right that we all want to have that right for ourselves, right? Every human being needs to have that right equally. So that's out of the way. I'm going to, in the comment section of this video, I'm going to pin a comment with something I had mentioned in this discussion. I was writing a book, and I'm sort of working on it when I have time, about my views on objective morality, because as it was mentioned to me by Deconverted Man and several other people who have written books themselves and know a lot about syllogisms and informal and formal logic, they've told me that my attempts at syllogisms, while admirable, are not successful. I have not landed the plane when it comes to coming up with a syllogism to defend my position on objective morality, and I accept that criticism. I've made a very strong argument, but I haven't been able to put a syllogism to it. I made a video recently articulating my argument. It has not been refuted yet. There's been a lot of comments on it, a lot of pushback, but nobody's actually addressed the actual argument or been able to refute it. I may do a follow-up video to that and highlight the comments and see how the discussion is going. Welcome to have people's pushback. If you can actually refute what I'm saying and educate me, I'm happy to accept that correction. But in the writing of this book about morality, I've came up with what I call the 7 pillars of ethics. And I do believe that if we were to adopt this globally, that we could have a global unification in the way that we treat each other. That doesn't mean we're going to have the same politics, the same religion, the same culture, whatever. I want diversity. But there is some things that we do need to have common globally. And that comes down to self-respect and respecting other people, appreciating the differences that we have. So the 7 pillars of ethics are, and these aren't necessary in any particular order, but I've got number 1 is public safety. So instead of saying, having an ethic about not murdering people, public safety, that murder would fall under public safety, right? Public trust is another one. So instead of saying we shouldn't steal from people, we shouldn't be lying to people, that falls under public trust. So anything that falls under public safety, anything that falls under public trust, those are covered in these 2 pillars. The 3rd pillar I call familial relations, meaning your relations with your family. Parents need to be responsible to raise their children. Okay. Children need to be loyal to their parents. Okay. Communities need to support each other. So familial relations is one of these pillars of ethics. Personal autonomy, extremely important. Every human being is an agent. Every human being as an agent sets goals and takes actions. That means every human being has a reason to have their freedom and well-being. If every person has a reason to have their freedom and well-being just because they're a human being, then they ought to have it, and we ought not interfere with each other's freedom and well-being. So that's one of the pillars of ethics. The other one is consequences for unlawful behavior. And essentially this means that we would codify the laws, right? So that we have a justice system. Okay. The other one is environmental harmony. It's extremely important that we're not abusing animals. We're not abusing the planet. We have to start taking better care of this planet. I'm talking about pollution. I'm talking about what we do with energy. I'm talking about what we do with farming, right? All these different issues come into play. So environmental harmony is one of the pillars of ethics. And the final pillar of ethics is virtue. This is how I come up with my own system of morality based on Aristotelian virtue, the golden mean, that perfect place between having too much of something or too little of something. So justice is right here. Above justice, too much, you would have vengeance. Too little, you would have unwarranted mercy, right? Courage, you have fear down here, and you have revenge up here. You can literally look at anything in life and you can figure out what the virtue is based on what would be too much or too little of something. It's pretty basic common sense. This comes from the ability to reason. Reason is what most of the objective moral principles are based on from philosophy. Most philosophers are moral realists if you actually look at the studies. So I'm in the majority opinion with the objective moral position. Most uneducated, meaning not in philosophy, not dumb or ignorant, but just people who are not educated in philosophy, who are skeptics, think that morality is subjective. But people who are actually educated in the specific field are in a majority agreement that's actually objective. And I've laid out a pretty strong argument for my case of why I think it's objective. And I put that video up. I might put a link to that video in the description. I can't think of anything. Oh, there was one last thing I wanted to mention, that Nathaniel, he had mentioned social Darwinism. That's something I'll probably maybe do a short video on to discuss, because I think this term is very problematic. This mindset is very problematic. So many people misunderstand Darwin's survival of the fittest. This is not might makes right. And that's what social Darwinism, when people talk about social Darwinism, this is really what they're talking about, is might makes right. That is not what survival of the fittest means at all. Survival of the fittest means best fit to survive within the environmental pressures, right? So sometimes being peaceful could lead to survival of the fittest, right? Sometimes the animals being the fastest, not the strongest, but the fastest, might give them this fitness for the environment. Sometimes camouflage. So there's so many different things that feed into this. It's not about being the strongest. It's about being the fittest to work within the environment. Human beings are a social species of animal. That means the better we get at cooperating, the better we will be able to survive within the environment. So survival of the fittest for human beings actually refers to cooperation, not might makes right. Completely opposite ends of the spectrum there. So I wanted to clarify that. Maybe Nathaniel and I can talk about that in a future conversation. Other than that, I've got this fantastic outro video. Let me...
channel. 3.30 for repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deacon Brennan, what do you do? Wait, objective ethics will be on your plate.